And now you're live.
Great. Thank you, Vanessa. Good evening, everyone. Happy New Year. Welcome to the Board of Selectmen meeting, January 4th, 2022, 6:30 p.m. All selectmen are in attendance. Call the meeting to order at 6:31. First item of business is public comment. I see we have some participants in the audience. If anyone would like to speak, please just raise your hand. We'll give it a second to see. All right, I see no hands raised. That being said, we will move on to scheduled appointments, Board of Health, discussion of date and logistics of town meeting. So Chelsea, before I toss this over to you, I'll just give a quick overview. So the Board of Health met this morning to discuss, obviously with the numbers rising, there's concern for town meeting. So in talking to the chair, Ms. Malinowski, she brought it up with Board of Health. So they've come back with some restrictions. And in your packet, you'll also see that town council had given an opinion on being able to move the date. So this will all play into the discussion we're going to have. But first, I'll let Chelsea, if you want to update us on the Board of Health's conversation today. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. So we did have a conversation. I had the town clerk and the town moderator there as well, just from a logistical standpoint. So the Board of Health's position is if the meeting were to be held indoors, that it be the same restrictions that we had at fall town meeting. So 6 feet apart and masked. I know one of the concerns that was had earlier today by Mr. Hegarty was the limitations of space at Trotter. And that we were a few seats away from having to suspend the meeting due to space capacity. And even if you were to open up all of the rooms at Trotter, all the classrooms, it wouldn't work logistics wise. And by the time you do all the spacing out within the classrooms, you still run the risk of running out of room. So the other option could be if the AG approves one of the articles that we passed at fall town meeting is to have it outside of Southborough, which potentially could be Northborough. So there's obviously more room opportunities there to have the meeting indoors. So kind of the same, we're taking the same stance given where we're at today and that we don't know what it's going to look like in March.
So one of the other things that we have to consider as well is we could certainly do an outside town meeting. We have the opportunity per council's letter to change the date of town meeting. I think going into April in a lot of ways, and in my opinion, and actually, Vanessa, can we bring Mr. Semino over? I see that he's out there as well, please. The board has the opportunity to change the date. We could do a later town meeting, potentially the last Saturday in April, and be able to have it outside. I know I've been contacted by a lot of people that are concerned about going back inside, period. Masked or not masked. I mean, we don't know what's going to happen in March. So those are some of the considerations for the board to make, is if there's an appetite to change town meeting to, again, it could be April 30th, it could be, a Saturday in May, but trying to be cognizant of elections and whatnot as well. So I'll just kind of open it up and kind of get everybody's thoughts. And, again, are you leaning more towards an indoor and outdoor and a potential date change? So Chelsea, will go ahead, Sam.
I've got a question just on the legality of this. I read Jay Tallerman's memo on that, and one of the things it refers to is that the town bylaws. It looked to me like you couldn't actually the selectmen can't override a town bylaw unilaterally. So is there still some sort of state temporary law or whatever regulation in effect here that allows us to move a town meeting unilaterally, where by the bylaw it says it has to be a particular range of dates there. So I was confused by that opinion.
So Mr. Purple spoke to council. As far as I know, Sam, there is nothing in effect with the emergency order that has expired. Mark, do you have anything based on your conversations with council?
No, I think, you know, what he put in his analysis was pretty clear, especially the italicized piece under the analysis, because he does talk about that, you know, the towns must hold their annual meeting February, March, April, May, or June. They need to be held before June 30th. But in the emphasized section, that emphasis was added, notwithstanding the provisions of this section or of any other law, bylaw, or charter to the contrary, a town by the vote of its board of selectmen or town council may delay the annual town meeting. So I do think it's seemed to me at least pretty clear that the power at this point rests with the board of selectmen if you do want to move the date, even though we do have a bylaw that states, you know, that it's the last Saturday in March.
Well, again, I was confused by that. So if that's what town council says, I guess that's what we can do. Thanks.
And Sam, I mean, obviously, we wouldn't just move the date without, you know, a sound public health type reason anyway. So, but
Sure.
we'll come back around. So Chelsea, did you want to?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, I think there's a way to do it safely, like we did in the fall. I just worry based on what could be on the warrant and generate, you know, a larger population. You know, obviously none of us have a crystal ball, and I don't think any of us thought we'd be sitting here a year ago still talking about how to safely hold a town meeting. I just think for planning purposes and kind of planning for the worst case scenario, I would be fine to move it outside at a later date.
All right, Mr. Healy.
Oh, sorry, I had trouble with my unmute. I guess my first question is, Mark, 2 years in a row now, we've had a later town meeting. You know, everything's gotten hazy, but 2020 was June and last year was May. I guess my first question is, from your perspective as the, you know, the town administrator, did holding it later adversely affect the functioning of the town from a budget, departmental, et cetera standpoint?
I don't think it did. And I will also, I guess, answer that question or add that I don't think the extra time helped us. I think we were ready to go when we were supposed to be ready to go. I was having this conversation with Brian Ballantyne earlier today, is that, you know, if we delay this from March until April, I still think we're going to have as much information, you know, as we would, you know, in February. You know, we're going to have the governor's budget. You know, in all likelihood, prior to town meeting, there's going to be a joint resolution from the House and the Senate on local aid. You know, we should have pretty good information, and you should have some feedback and everything from your ARPA committee by then as well, as to what impacts their decisions or their recommendations to you, you know, will have on any FY23 budget. So I don't think delay.
Let me just interrupt. There's no question in my mind, and just from a you know, if we didn't have a public health concern sort of hovering over us, that you know, we would, as we always have before 2020 and 2021, we would meet our town meeting deadline, and our other boards that are involved would function properly, and you folks would put the budget together. I don't have any concerns about that. My question is the other side of it, and it seems like I think you answered it, and that is, from a town standpoint, there's no downside from, you know, administratively, financially, otherwise, holding it later. Is that a fair statement?
I think that's a fair statement. Last year, it'd be a fair statement, but having the town meeting in June, just a couple of weeks before the end of the fiscal year, And, you know, you could bring Brian over if you wanted to, and, you know, to answer probably on behalf of Carla, but I think that it makes it very difficult when the end of the fiscal year is just a couple of weeks after you've got out of town meeting.
Okay, so the more, if we were to consider a later date, the farther away we stay from June 30, the better.
Right.
Okay. I guess, geez, these last, what are we at now? 20 months have you know, been driven by uncertainty, and that's where we find ourselves again tonight. I hold it later. I would hold it later, and whether we end up doing it indoors or outdoors. I mean, you know, geez, ideally we decide to hold it later, and all of a sudden whatever date we pick in April or May, we can do it indoors, and that's great. But if from a town standpoint, there's not a downside, again, administratively, financially, otherwise, except for the pushing up to June 30th that Mark indicated, the more comfort level we can give folks that they can participate in our town government, in our town meeting safely, I think the better. So I'd be inclined to push it again. And, you know, geez, if all of a sudden March comes around and everything's great and we could have had it, then I'll feel great. So those are my thoughts.
Okay, and I'll just add, Marty, too, and Chelsea, I saw this by watching your meeting. I don't know if you want to just chime in that Jim spoke about what the cost differential would be between actually doing it inside or outside. So Chelsea, if you want to touch on that. Sorry,
Yes,
you're muted.
I know, sorry. Jim's actually here too. So Jim, if you want to add anything, or if I mess it up, let me know. But the incremental cost for the restrictions that we would require inside would cost the same as if it was outside. So regardless of what we do, it's going to cost the same.
Sorry, I'm muted. I'll go to Jim and Paul as well. So Sam?
Thanks. Yeah, I firmly believe that COVID is going to be with us in significant fashion through the town meeting time here. So I think that public safety concern and resident concern about finding a way to do this safely is paramount. And it seems to me that moving it later gives us a little more flexibility to know what's going on with some of these things. And I would argue that outside would be great, but seems to me the right fallback is the Algonquin facility, which, assuming the AG approves our bylaw change, which seems to be very likely, that seems to me to be the place to plan for it. It's got the capacity for a significantly larger crowd than we had this year, and it is reasonably accessible to everybody in town. So that seems to me to be the right way to go. Delay, not too close to June 30th, but focus on Algonquin as the primary site. Thanks.
Okay, Andrew?
Yeah, I think that the emerging consensus here of postponing does make sense. Mark, to your point about there really wasn't any difference in the information that we would have, and you know, if we have a regularly scheduled March town meeting versus a later town meeting, I thought part of the reason why we could benefit from a postponement was to get more information tentatively about what the tax shift would be, residential versus commercial, because that can have a big impact on the budget. So it sounds like you know, we've thought about a way to have it both indoors and outdoors. I mean, one of the things that's an obvious concern if you try to hold a outdoor town meeting in the last Saturday in April is the weather would not be good. And so I think that Mr. Semino and Mr. Hegarty have probably thought about ways that there is, as you get closer to the date, you know, how you would plan to hold it indoors or outdoors. So overall, I'm okay with moving it, but I'd like it on the earlier side, definitely not as late as it was in June of 2020.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Paul, do you want to add anything? I'm sure you have some some thoughts on delaying town meeting and kind of
Yeah.
logistics as well?
Well, logistics I'll leave to Jim. I think he'll tell you inside, outside, sooner or later, he's got it covered. That's how Jim rolls. My only concern, and I want to come back to something you said, Lisa, earlier on in this. I start from the premise that we have a bylaw, we should stick to it unless there's a reason not to. And I thought I heard you say, Lisa, that you're hearing from people that they weren't comfortable with the indoor meeting in the fall, or they don't want to have, they're not inclined to attend an indoor meeting if we were to do that in March, because we could be in the Algonquin gym in March and spread out even more than we did before. So, unless we feel like that is a, likely to not work well for other reasons, that would be my preference, but I'm just one person in all this.
So Paul, I can tell you that I've had probably close to 20 people reach out in the last 2 weeks, maybe. Obviously, everybody's concerned because the COVID numbers are so high. So as people are thinking ahead and they're thinking about March, and they're thinking, there's no way I'm going indoors, with a bunch of people in it. And Chelsea can probably attest to, again, how high the numbers were in Southborough the last 14 days alone. I know the numbers today for the state were just unbelievable, something I never thought would reach. So that's more the concern, Paul, is just being inside. I think it's not as much about the masks. It's not as much about being 6 feet apart. It's just having a large number of people being in one place together. And the numbers may take a decrease by March. I don't know. And I don't know, Mark, if we actually have to set the location. I mean, we're not going to be posting. We're going to close the warrant, but we're not necessarily posting it. So we have the opportunity to, as we get a little bit closer, maybe February even, take a look at, with obviously, Paul, with conversations with you and Jim as well, decide the best place, and Board of Health, sorry, Chelsea, decide maybe what the best place is.
Sure. No, you don't have to do that until the warrant's posted. And, but, again, we want to make sure that we hear back from the AG's office that they've approved our bylaw. So Algonquin is an option. So that, you don't need to do that tonight. You're simply limiting the universe of the articles that you could be discussing at that town meeting. That's all you're doing this evening.
So I think too, it would be good if we could come up with a date, because again, I know one of the things we had, or Ms. Malinowski had mentioned before is, maybe letting Southborough sports know, youth sports know that, the fields are going to be closed on this day, to be able to have better participation and the opportunity for all residents, parents included, to be able to attend. So I think if we set a tentative, not tentative, let's set the date, and then we can let recreation. Chelsea, I think that was, I guess I'm speaking for you. I'll let you jump in. Sorry.
No, that's okay. Go ahead, Paul.
Just before we, I just want to then summarize sort of where my position on this, which is that, I start from the bylaw date, but if there is reason to believe that would be have a big negative impact on participation, then I understand and support moving it for that reason.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Great. So Chelsea, do you want to just add on anything that I had kind of spoke for you for?
Yeah, I mean, I think it probably makes sense to touch base with the recreation director to talk about, if any sports have put in for permits yet, and to have him communicate once we decide on a date to those groups, so that they're aware and have time to plan around it, so that we can, I don't think that happened last year. And I think we picked the date kind of after the sports schedules were set and the permits were pulled already. So I just want to make sure that folks have ample time to shift schedules around so that more people can participate.
Okay. Thank you, Chelsea. So Mr. Hagerty, Mr. Logistics, and you always, as Paul said, you always have the right answers, and always tell us how easy it is, but we know it's not. We know how great a job you do and how much it's appreciated. So what are your thoughts on indoor, outdoor, logistics wise, if we, and again, I'm just going to throw April 30th out because that's one of the dates that was trying to be cognizant of with the election.
Okay. I think you're right on the money with a public hesitancy to be indoors at this time. And I think that's going to last for a while. When I think of that, I also think of capacity issues. Attendance at town meeting is issue driven, and all in between registered voters and guests and workers at the special town meeting, we had roughly 300 people. And we, between using the gym and the auditorium, we were incredibly close to not being able to do more. So realistically, you can't use trotty or indoors for more than 300 people, because even if you incur the extensive expense to go to the classrooms with the spacing and stuff, you're only going to gather like 8 spots per classroom. So it's not really practical. So if you think you're going to have a substantial town meeting with more than 300 people, indoors at Algonquin is out. Ironically, 300 were the number of seats we had set aside for Neary outdoors. And we can expand that a bit, but not a lot. It would require us to move the moderator back probably 30 feet, 40 feet. We have this space going back and then spreading it wide. So we could probably get 400 people in there outdoors. End of April, I don't know what the weather, I have to look to see statistically what the rain has been at that. And, April showers, Mayflower is kind of a deal. I will also get a hard number from a tent company to see what it would cost to tent that. I've heard some astronomical numbers, but I'm going to get a tent number, a real number, should throw that out to you as well. Of course, one of the considerations about that is if we looked at the tents that the school used and rec used over at Woodward, and if you put a series of those up, that's fine. But then you have the rain that would come down between all these separate tents on the people. So I'm just going to get some numbers to throw them out, what's involved here. If you flip and you look at Algonquin, Paul's right on the money. The gym is roughly twice the size of what we have here. And then the auditorium is almost twice as large as the auditorium at Trotter. It's 900 capacity at Algonquin versus 505 pre-COVID. So I think if we use a combination of the gym and the auditorium at Algonquin, we could have twice the capacity. I'm confident we could have 450 plus people in there. I'll give you some definitive numbers. I was supposed to go over last week and measure this, but with COVID and all the rest of it, I wanted to stay out of their hair. We'll go from there. Another consideration, if you decided and you wanted to go to Algonquin, would be the outdoors. If you were concerned about capacity issues at Neary, would be to hold it on the ball field at Algonquin. Depending upon how you do that, one way to do it might be have the moderator facing the stands, and then you could actually bring the stands into play. People could space out and go from there. So there's a lot of different ways that you could do this. We'll make it work. I'll have hard numbers for the moderator and for you to see what your options are. And like I say, cost, it's very similar all these places. I'm not really worried about that in any cost differentials. But again, the $64 question, the issue becomes that whatever we do, we want to ensure that we have sufficient seating for people to participate so we don't have to pull the plug. I remember a few years ago, we had an audio failure at a town meeting, and we had to call it a night and come back another night, and we certainly want to have excess capacity to make this work. And that's all driven on what shows up in the warrant. So anyway, I'll have hard numbers for you. We'll make this work. If you're saying 4:30, let me do this when I reach out. I spoke to the superintendent about potentially using Algonquin. I'll throw some dates out to them just to see if you were to decide to go to Algonquin, or ask them to let us use Algonquin. Are there any conflicts in that range? I mean, who knows with the sports being delayed? Last year, didn't we have football playing in this time of the year or early spring? I mean, it's a weird time, but I'll circle them with them just to make sure everyone there's on board. So anyway, at the end of the day, we'll make it work safely for everybody.
Okay. So Mark, when is it 14 days or 30 days before town meeting, the warrant has to be posted?
7.
7 days.
Yes.
Oh.
7 for an annual town meeting, 14 for a special.
Okay. So realistically, we could wait until the beginning of March, take a look at where we're at, then really decide on the location. I think that the date is the driving factor at this point on what we think would work. I mean, we have to keep in mind in April, you have April vacations.
Yep.
for the kids. And then again, I know we don't have to have town meeting before the elections, but it's kind of
Yeah.
how it's always been done. So if we try to be cognizant of that, that's where the 4:30 date came from. I mean, I'm interested if, the board is willing to entertain yes, Mr. Purple.
I'm sorry, the only thing I just want to, and just for some consideration to Mr. Hegarty, I know that we can wait and post, close to the date and everything, but depending on what we do, he's got to circle the wagon, so to speak, and coordinate whether it's outdoor, whether it's indoor. And again, a lot of people, a lot of communities are having the same conversations we are, and they're going to be looking for similar services. So the availability of those services, the sooner that we make a decision, is going to make things easier for him to be able to, provide the logistics.
Yep. No, I
Just something
agree,
to
Mark.
keep in mind, that's all.
Nope. Appreciate that.
Yeah, no, and I would hope that we'll have a better judge a month from now, Mark. Maybe we won't. Hopefully we're going to be on the downswing, and, there'll be a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel, and people will have some level of confidence, as far as place. But again, I agree, Jim. We have a lot of placeholders on the warrant too that we don't know. There may be some drivers in there that, may bring folks out to town meeting as well. So, that being said, is the board open to any specific dates? I think the sooner that we can set a date, the sooner we can let recreation know, and, we can make sure that kids that play in town sports, the parents have an opportunity to participate and attend. I know that was always a concern, and that's why it was moved to Saturday. So we can go round the wheel and see what everybody thinks of if April 30th, maybe even the first weekend at Saturday in May. The election's the 10th, I believe, Jim. The 10th of May. Is that correct? I'm pulling up my calendar real quick here.
That
It's
is
the second
correct.
Tuesday. Okay.
Yes.
So, so I don't know, Chelsea. Well,
So I don't necessarily have an opinion on the April 30th versus May 7th, other than maybe it'll be a little bit better weather in May, although I don't know that a week will really make a difference. The only other thing that I would say is maybe, I'm trying to remember when baseball actually starts their season. They definitely start after soccer. I'm just trying to figure out, like, if we did it on April 30th, would that be less disruptive to at least one sport that maybe hasn't started yet, that maybe their first weekend would be May 7th. That would be that may be a question for Tim to see, where permits may be coming from. But that would be my only rationale for doing the 30th versus the 7th, is just less disruption.
okay. Mr. Healy.
Memory serves me right, I was the one arguing for June last year because May seemed more risky. I feel the same way about April. I guess my inclination, I'd also, I have a very strong inclination that we do it outside. I'm not a big fan of doing it at Algonquin. I think a lot of it, there's more room there. But I don't think that's going to solve the issue of people feeling uncomfortable being indoors. I just don't think it will. So from my perspective, thinking about an outdoor town meeting is makes more sense here. I think April is risky. I guess my comfort level for tonight would be, and I don't know if we have to take a formal vote on it. There seems to be a pretty decent consensus that we not do it in March indoors, and I'm assuming that there's a consensus that we not do it in March outdoors, with a date somewhere between late April and mid-May to be determined. It was in the last 2 years. It was after the election. So, and I don't think, I don't know. Maybe others have a different perspective on it. I don't think that had an enormous effect on things. But anyway, that'd be my comfort level I'm inclined to go with an outdoor town meeting rather than trying to fit it into Algonquin. I'd be inclined I'd be comfortable tonight, either with a vote or a consensus saying that we're not going to have it the third weekend in March, and that it will be held at a date to be determined later, sometime between April 30th and the middle of May. That's my comfort level right now.
Yeah, and you know what, Marty, maybe during that time, we could reach out to Tim, Chelsea, and find out, when baseball start is, and, opening day is a pretty big deal. And yes, Mr. Semino.
I just want to remind everybody that, and understanding how people feel now, meaning the voters at large feel about being inside, either now or in March, but you could have an 80-degree day in May where it still pours rain. I mean, being inside has the benefit of being certain you're going to have it. So it doesn't mean you have to decide tonight or react to that point, but I just want to make sure that point is made.
No, thank you, Paul. Sam?
Yeah, I agree with Mr. Healy that now we say it's not going to happen in March, date to be determined. And I think that it's worth taking a closer look at not just our rec department, but other sports activities and other potentially conflicting activities to see if there is a day from end of April into mid-May or so that looks better in terms of fewer conflicts. We're never going to find one that has no conflicts, as I recall from the past. But again, there are other sports leagues, teams that Southborough people are involved in. And I think it's worth looking fairly broadly for other potential conflicts, meetings, groups, and so forth that are having activities during that time to make sure that we understand the impact on people's schedules and look for the least disruptive time to do it across a broad range of activities. So with that data, I think we can then make a better choice of specific dates.
Yes, and no, that's a good point, because the later we get to, you're looking at potential graduations and, all the activities that go along with that as well. So, okay. So Andrew, are you also good with just deciding we're going to wait? And then when we come back, maybe at our meeting on the 18th, we'll have a better idea of potential dates.
Yeah, yes, and I think that the COVID situation may change a lot in the next month or so. Then that more up-to-date information may influence our decision about inside, outside, and exactly what date it will be.
Okay, and Mr. Semino, can you also kind of look over your calendar and see, from April 30th through, the end of May, what would or would work for your calendar? So, Mark, do we need to take we're closing the warrant tonight in a little bit. Do we need to take an official vote, or is just our no? Okay, so but we can let it be known.
I think the sentiment is good enough. I would suggest, I do know that that the town clerk and his staff and everything, they have broad shoulders, but scheduling a town meeting on March 7th and he's got the town election 3 days later. I think there should be some consideration and try to make sure that there's some separation to those things as well.
Nope. And go ahead, Mr. Haggerty.
I just took a quick look at the historical average temperatures. April 30th, historically in Worcester, it's 61-degree high, 42-degree low. If you push that back to May 21, it raises the historical average to 67 high, 48 low. So, that's just throwing that out there. It does. It's what it's worth. Thank you.
Okay. And Jim, just one other question before we move on from this. So would a potential May 7th, which is just before the election on the 10th, would that really put undue stress on the clerk's office?
No, it wouldn't. It would be tougher if we went from had the town meeting on the Saturday following the election.
Okay. Well, that's good to know. Okay. So the town meeting after is Okay. Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Semino. Thank you, Mr. Haggerty. I think we have a
Good night.
path forward.
Bye-bye.
Awesome. Good night. Thank you.
All right, have a good night. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. All right, next on the agenda, MTC survey review. Let's see, can we bring Ms. Varner, Ms. Bouvier, and is it just the two? Oh, Matt's here too as well. Okay. All right. Good evening, everyone. Matt, welcome. Angela, welcome. Marianne, welcome as well. We appreciate the information that you provided us already. We're looking forward to, oh, and we have Marianne and let me screw this up. And Brian, welcome. So Matt, I'll turn this over to you. You can kind of give an introduction to what we're going to see tonight, and we'll go from there.
That's good. Actually, I'll turn it over to Angela, who's done most of the prep work for this meeting in coordination with Marianne and Brian to do the intro.
Great. Welcome, Angela.
Thank you, everyone. Hi. Thanks for having us with you. As you might remember, the Municipal Technology Committee worked with the various departments across the town, as well as the Select Board, to create the town's first citizen survey. Marianne and Brian worked with the MTC to do the analysis of those results, and that's what we'd like to share with you tonight. So they will be going through the results that we received back from the citizens, and then we'll summarize at the end some of the MTC projects that we think the feedback might prompt us to want to bring before the ARPA committee for further funding. So I will turn it over to Marianne and Brian.
Great. Welcome, Marianne and Brian. Happy New Year.
Thank you. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Give me 1 second. Let me share my screen and we can then get started. All right. Can you all see the screen? All right. Sounds good. Well, thank you so much for giving us this opportunity to present the survey data. Angela and Matt have been wonderful guides in like making sure that we are looking at the data in the sense of like how the town would see the data. So we just wanted to share with you some of the cursory insights that we saw earlier. With the pre-reading materials, there's a lot more slides to go through, but we don't want to bore you with like so many of them. So with that, I just wanted to let you know that this is the original slides. We'll be skipping some of those slides in order to present you with some brevity. So with a little bit of an agenda and level setting, we wanted to let you know who we are, about us, dive into the Southborough town data a little bit. I'm happy to have some of those discussions with you all. We have our recommendations and we'll leave the appendix for your bedside reading. All right. So a little bit about us. We moved to Southborough in 2018.
I don't think, by the way, I don't think the slides are progressing for us. I don't know if anybody else sees that. I think we're still seeing the first slide.
Okay.
That's strange.
There we go.
Okay.
We'll do it on small mode.
Okay. We'll do it on a not in presentation mode. I think there's some issues with our connection. But you do see the about us slide at this point?
Yep.
Okay. So just diving back, we moved to Southborough in 2018. We love to travel, hike, volunteer, and spend quality time with our friends and family. My day job, I work for CVS Health. I lead the immunization team on understanding where vaccinations are across our retail stores. And I'll turn it over to Brian.
Yeah, and I'm Brian. I'm Marianne's husband, and I work as an engineer, focusing on things like data analysis and research. So it was really a pleasure to be able to assist in this effort and put some of our skills to use for the town. Let me make this small here so I can see. So in summary, what we got basically was a big pack from a survey that was sent out, as I'm sure some of you are aware. And overall, what we found is that most residents are either somewhat satisfied or higher with the town's perception and overall town services. We saw that the greatest satisfaction was that people felt that Southborough was really a great place to raise their children, with good schools, there's supportive programs, and really attentive public safety services. Definitely got a lot of positive feedback about things like the police, emergency medical, and fire services. As with the good, there was also some bad. The greatest dissatisfaction with our residents from the survey data was that they felt that there was a lack of safe and accessible communal space. That really centered around a lot, especially with like walking around in Southborough. So you'll see that there's a bit of a focus on things like sidewalks even, or just other safe communal spaces for both children and adults to get outside and enjoy. They felt that there was some non-transparency with leadership. I'm sure that some of you who maybe are in leadership positions, it's not the first time you're hearing something like that. And we'll have to keep in mind, obviously, there may be some survey bias where sometimes a squeaky wheel gets the grease, and often you see more negative reviews sometimes when you send out a survey. But that was definitely one of the feedbacks that we got. And, we proposed that just the town selectmen with the MTC try to create, communicate, and execute on these action items from the survey data. And our goal is to just help to inform for town projects and policies. Okay. I think we'll skip over a couple of, we'll actually take a look at this slide, and we'll skip some of the next ones just in the interest of time. But to look at the survey responses and our methodology that we use. So there were 423 total respondents, and that's about 4 to 6% of the town. There was a total question of 157 questions. So we did see that there definitely would be some survey fatigue with having such a long survey. And we actually saw that quite steeply initially early on in the survey. So what you're looking at with this chart is the number of questions plotted on the x-axis across here, up to 157, starting at 0. And then on the y-axis here, we have the number of survey respondents. So initially we have, all 423 people who answered the first question. And pretty quickly, I think what happens with surveys is someone gets past the first question and then they get busy and they X out or whatever happens. So we see a pretty steep drop off, but after that, it remains pretty level. And then as far as methodology, we wanted to stick to basically just descriptive and sentiment analysis on the answers to the questions, as well as some of the free response questions. So we'll be moving on a little bit, although just so you're aware, there's some demographic information as well as some insights to the survey data and those slides. But what was really interesting to look at was some of the open free response questions. It was a little bit more difficult to analyze these objectively, as the answers were a little bit subjective. However, what I did was a type of sentiment analysis, as well as look at some of the just kind of the buzzwords popping out as some of the most common words that people answered. So for this question, it was asking about the need for increased and diverse town engagement and transparency. And people really felt that there was maybe a lack of diverse resident engagement in the leadership specifically. So people are either feeling that the leadership doesn't represent themselves, or they'd like to see a little bit more diversity in that. They'd like to see a little bit more transparency. There was a lot of talk about things like the cost of taxes not being aligned with town services. We didn't see too many complaints about the actual cost of the taxes. It was more so that what people were getting for their tax money. And people also felt that there was really inadequate public facilities, especially geared towards adults. They were pretty satisfied with things geared towards children, but maybe some people would like to see more facilities geared towards adult recreation. Too few businesses and poor walkability compared to some of the neighboring towns. So overall, this question came out with a negative sentiment, which is basically just a measurement of how positive or negative people responded to the question. And the confidence with that is 68%, meaning that's how accurate the analysis was. So there's a pretty good mix of both positive and negative here, although it steered a little bit more negative. Let's see. So another question here. This question is regarding the greatest dissatisfaction, and specifically was regarding sidewalks, bicycle routes, and town safety. So we pulled this out just because it had the highest negative sentiment. There were plenty of questions here that had a much more positive sentiment that we just aren't sharing in the interest of time. But we're pretty confident based on the analysis that people would like to see some action here. So one of the common responses was that we'd like to see more bicycle and pedestrian friendly paths. There were some specific routes that were highlighted here. People were really just feeling that the town was a little bit too dangerous to let their children go out walking or riding their bicycles, for example. Some conversation about, say, the transfer station etiquette, recycling education, swap shop, and other town services. And then finally, another major issue was some of the drainage and degrading water quality issues and things like town upkeep, like trees and shrub trimming. So I think people really just want to be able to see that the town is being taken care of based on the response here. So I'll turn the next slide to Marianne.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks. With that, though, I wanted to take some time to pause and see if you had any responses or feedback of the information you've seen so far.
Great. Actually, I'll start if you don't mind, Mary Ann.
Sure.
It's Lisa. So I found the information good to know. I mean, obviously the dissatisfaction piece, it's even hard for me to say, was concerning. And the one thing I would like to see is, I know the master plan committee had done a survey and we were actually able to see the responses. I think for us to better respond to the public, well, I appreciate, pulling out, some of the key words that came up. I would actually like to see the comments that were left. The only way to improve things is to truly understand. And I know you guys had a lot of data, and I appreciate that you put it into, a summary. But I think it would be useful for me as one member of the board to actually see the comments that were made, and, to get an idea of the number of comments that may have been made towards one thing or another. I think it helps guide us as we move forward as well. So that would be my only comment to that. And again, I thank you for compiling all of the data. I'll open it up to the board to see if anyone else has any questions or comments on this. Mr. Healy.
Really not a question, just a comment. I mean, I've got a couple of kids who are statisticians, so I'll at some point sit down with them and go through some analysis. Kudos to you folks for, I think this is the most number of respondents I've seen in a survey. I mean, it's still not great, 4 to 6%, but it's better than the 180 or 220 we've seen at some of the other surveys. It's still self-selection, and it has to be filtered through that prism. But it reinforces some of the things that I've thought about from a town perspective. It gives food for additional thought, and is always helpful. So so far so good in going through the work you folks did.
Thank you, Mr. Stivers.
Thanks. I'll echo Mr. Healy's comments that this is a great project and very valuable. And I think that not only are these results interesting, but I think that the Technology Committee has a structure here that now can be used for other survey projects going forward very efficiently. And so I think that's a great capacity to have in town, to be able to maybe conduct more targeted surveys on specific issues, for example, from time to time, as well as other broad surveys, and get a better sense of what people generally feel. And I think there certainly is some self-selection on these kind of things, but I think it's important to let people who feel strongly about these kind of topics have an opportunity to express themselves, and for us to listen to those kind of feelings. So great project, and we greatly appreciate the effort that's gone into this. And so far, no specific questions. I saw the longer version of the Technology Committee meeting, so I've seen the first version of it. And again, I think it's a great project. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dennington.
I thank you for your excellent work in putting this together. In terms of next steps, I absolutely agree that it would be productive to forward this on to the ARPA committee as well as the master plan committee. To me, the really kind of interesting disconnect here was that although there were some complaints of dissatisfaction with leadership, a lot of the views about what people are looking for here are things that actually the board has been working on, like in the last couple months. To Sam's point about how this can be a model for things going forward, I think that there's really particularly a place for really short targeted surveys. So for example, in the controversy over the renaming of the mascot for Algonquin, I'm receiving emails that are very, very targeted requests that only are just like 5 questions. What about these alternative names and things like that? You just click and it takes a very, very short amount of time. I find those really helpful. It's the longer surveys which are just really harder to get through. Overall, I think this is great work. We definitely should be thinking about, ways to use technology like this more going forward. And I think, again, there's more of a real utility in very targeted surveys.
Thank you. Ms. Malinowski.
Thank you. And thank you for the presentation. In preparing for this meeting, I actually went back and looked at the meeting that MTC came to us to originally talk about the survey that they wanted to roll out. So I'm a little bit confused as to kind of the sample questions that were listed in that document that MTC provided to kind of how we got here. I felt like the responses here are pretty bold statements. And I just don't see, maybe it's because we don't have the data that backs it up, but it doesn't seem very productive. I think there's some things in here that we can take back, but I don't see the negative kind of sentiments that you're referring to and how we're supposed to take them back and do better. Like what part of transparency isn't, is the board not fulfilling? We have we have a lot of communities and boards in town that we post openings for, and we advertise for people to apply to volunteer their time. Is there a better way that we can do that to get more diversity on our boards and committees? So I just, hopefully with some of the backup data that you have, we can get to some of the action items that we can do in terms of making it better, but I'm kind of still struggling to see how the MTC proposed survey around technology and access technology and accessibility to our website and how to use our website better translates into some of the negative feedback that you're presenting here. So my other question is, how many people actually completed the survey? I know 400 started it and you had a 51% completion rate. So do you know how many actually completed it?
Chelsea, so just to begin, we paused. I still have 3 more slides to go to. So we started with the negative. We wanted to let you know what the recommendations are to go through the slides, but I believe Matt has his hand up. So let me pause there and turn that over to Matt, and then we can finish the slides that we have.
You just want to address the question of the survey origin. The survey origin, this survey is modeled after what is being done in other towns and other cities of trying to become more data driven in everything that we do. And this was, many of the questions were originally copied and pasted from a survey that other municipalities were using. And we did want to move towards a annual survey that covered multiple town departments. And so, the MTC, we did start with questions for technology focused, but we also partnered with police and fire, and they contributed questions. Ms. Galligan contributed to questions regarding public works, and all these options you see on this slide right now are options that she wanted to know, like what are people's priority? And so these were just copy and paste from her. So this is really a survey that many departments contributed to. They contributed questions to, and we just assembled it into a unified survey. I think in terms of the negative sentiment, I think this is caused by that there were some free text, free answer responses of how to improve or what needs to be improved. And I'm guessing there are a variety of respondents who say, something needs to change, but then maybe they don't necessarily give clear details and action items how to change it. So, but I'll defer to Brian and Marianne about that.
Of course, and as volunteers, we took time off to actually pull together the data. I think we have turned over most of the data items over to the MTC, so I think there's more distribution of that. With that, there's a large slide deck, but there's also an Excel spreadsheet of all the different responses that are in there that I believe are in your possession as well.
I can answer a couple other questions as well. So with that 50% completion rate, we had about 230 persons who fully completed the survey. I forget exactly how many free response questions there were, but I believe it was less than 10, maybe between 5 and 10. And as Lisa suggested, it was very insightful to read a lot of those free responses, but because they're so varied based on what people type in. It's very difficult to kind of come up with a summary, but I definitely would encourage you to go through and read those. The numbers are not as big because they were optional. Although it definitely would be helpful to read through those and get some insight. Just to pull out maybe one example that I can remember, as far as like transparency, people were talking about how they digest and access some of the information regarding the town. So there was some concerns about being able to like just even understand how they could learn about what was going on in the town, and maybe some of the conduits for which that information was being distributed wasn't quite right for them. So again, as far as respondents, that may not represent the whole town and what they feel, but there was, a few people who had some concerns with that. But like I said, there's plenty more information in there. Happy to provide you with that raw data if you want to take the time to read through it.
That would be great, because I think it's important if we're going to get feedback like that, I'd like to be able to address it and make things better. I think just words on a piece of paper doesn't really give us a path forward to understand what people are looking for. So I think if there's specific things like that, that would be helpful. And I agree that the slide that you're on right now, Marianne, is great to know what people are looking for, but I think there's a lot of other boards and committees in town that should have input on this. And I know I had mentioned this when MTC originally came, was that capital should be heavily involved in in making up this survey, given that they're kind of the link to all the capital articles that come forward related to all town departments. So I would be looking for their input on how this would fit into the 10-year capital plan. I also think master plan should be involved as well as they're wrapping up their reports. Thank you. That's all.
Chelsea, that's a great comment, and we can segue right into this slide. So as the Department of Public Works have consulted with this question, and the MTC committee put this question in the survey themselves, so this is directly a collaboration between both committees, is to look at the highest priority of what areas can the Public Works Department really focus on. And so within the survey, with those respondents, we saw that the highest priority here is looking at the sidewalks on Newton Street, Porterville Road, by Route 30, Deerfoot Road, and Flag Road with the current funding. And so with a follow-up question to this particular question, we saw that 54% of responses stated that no increase in property tax should be necessary to fund this, and that the town should defund other areas and fund these priorities. With that suggestion though, and it is a survey response, this would be really to the board and to all the other committees to really have the best intentions in mind for the community as they're looking forward to what the priorities should be. So just a couple more slides, and then I'll turn it over to Angela and Matt.
Marianne, can I just ask, this is Lisa again, can you just go back one slide? Just one quick question.
Mm-hmm.
So out of the 54% of responses, I don't know if you have the data in front of you, that was based on what number of people made up the 54%? I don't know if this was towards the end of the survey, so it may have been less. I'm just, again, as we move forward, any data that we have can certainly help us.
That's fair. The reason I don't have a number of people is because I wanted to present the data in a sense of like a whole. So let's say even if it's like 100 people, right? So 54 of them would state that no increase. Yeah. There is a slide, I think, later in the deck that actually breaks it out.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
I think this question actually was a little later in the slide deck. So my guess would be between 200 to 300 respondents, but it's
but it was three questions after this particular question.
Okay.
That I do remember.
Okay, that's perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. So with that, moving on to like streamlining communication. So Chelsea, to your point on here are words on a slide deck or just survey responses, but how can we streamline that and communicate to the broader community? And to one of the board members who mentioned, 4 to 6%, it's greater survey response than we've had in the past. So how can we do that with the communication channels that we have currently? And so what I put together here is communication channels on how frequent the respondents use those channels. So we're going through like Facebook groups and mysouthborough.com on a daily frequency, where you go all the way down to like, online payment of town taxes and fees. Of course, that would be somewhat yearly, down to the cable channel where we saw respondents that said less than yearly. So with those opportunities, there's 2 priority communication methods that we saw to develop over the next 2 years. And this is whether to the board's discussion or to MTC's discussion on, the usefulness of the town's website and an opportunity to engage and provide input into decisions made by the town. So with that last piece, I wanted to turn to our last slide, and then we'll open it up again for discussion on the recommendations that we saw from the survey. Again, we think about it as like data explorers, and we had the data in the survey that we had, and we packaged it together to give you a broad overview of what the data shows. And with that, we have 3 recommendations. The first one is to incentivize survey engagement. So another board member stated how, shorter survey questions or shorter timeframes to really get a snapshot of like what a person thinks of is a viable opportunity to really increase that engagement. And maybe there's an opportunity to incentivize survey engagement. So that leads to 2, which is shorter and more frequent surveys. And then the third piece is regular collaboration with other Southborough town committees and organizations so that their input is reflected on the survey as well. And with that, I think we have the rest of our presentation. Feel free to go through any of these. And if there's any additional comments or questions, we're happy to answer them.
Marianne, maybe just in terms of next steps. So Matt did share this MTC data with the different departments that had originally requested questions be put into the survey. So this has been distributed to the other departments for their review. And for the MTC, what we're working on is taking the technology specific responses and looking at how we can potentially make the town website more interactive, different things that we think would help with the communication components of the survey feedback. Those are the initiatives that within the MTC will be driving forward in the next year, working with other groups.
Okay, great, Angela. Thank you. So we'll open it back up. I know that the board has looked through, and again, Marianne and Brian, thank you for compiling all the data. Very appreciated. But we'll do one more pass of the board. Any additional comments, questions? We'll start with Mr. Stivers.
Nope, I'm all set for now. Great work, and appreciate the good work, and look forward to following up on a number of these suggestions and comments. Thank you.
Great. Mr. Dennington.
Hi. So follow-up question I have. So as a next step, if there were particular committees or boards that wanted to do, really targeted surveys that would be useful to making a decision in the short term. So I'm just going to make up some random hypothetical. Let's say like the Trails Committee had a budget of X. I want to know whether they want to put a trail on, the north side of the town or the south side of the town. And they thought, well, maybe we can do a survey, work with MTC, create a really targeted survey, the town like markets it, and then we try to get, a pretty robust response, and the results would come in and they would give whatever weight they wanted to. Is that something that town can do, or that the MTC townhouse works together with so that other? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, we'd be very happy to support that. And, there's,
well, I just suggested, I don't even know if it's possible.
No, it's definitely
Mark,
possible.
has a view on that. Or...
We definitely are looking to, MTC is looking to support and help the technology department of the town become more data driven and evaluate different survey technologies. For example, the SurveyMonkey account that we're using is also used by Fire actively. They've actually been doing their own surveys.
Yeah, I am familiar with that, very familiar with that.
So, and I think that there's even other boards and committees that have already gone out and get their own SurveyMonkey accounts. And so I think there is a sort of a narrow line between everybody doing their own survey with their own technology and people getting survey fatigue by the number of surveys, the number of emails and so forth. Maybe where possibly we can do a consolidation into, hey, here it is. This is the one survey per year. But I think we should end up with a good complement between a yearly annual survey, which we are interested in doing again this next year, and making it more streamlined, making it more dynamic, as well as putting in place technology throughout the town to allow various different departments, committees to have the instantaneous feedback that we're talking about. So when you walk out of the door of the townhouse, be nice if there were a QR code right there. How was your visit? How was your experience? What's the suggestions you have? Same thing with the transfer station, same thing with the rec department, where you're physically visiting certain spaces, or after you get after you have some sort of virtual interaction, after you pay your taxes, or after you do something online, getting immediate responses there. So I think an ideal world, we'd have both. We have the individual, very short, one word, positive, negative, basically allows to do a net promoter score on individual interaction, that micro interaction with a particular town department, as well as maybe a once per year larger survey, hopefully not as large as the one we just did.
All right, y'all said, Andrew? Okay, Ms. Malinowski.
Thank you. I do have one question for Marianne on slide 10, where the highest priority projects were ranked. Did you categorize that slide in particular for DPW, or was that the top projects across the town? And are there other slides related to other projects?
So that
for other
particular
areas?
question came from DPW, and they put in those options for people to pick through.
Okay.
I believe
So-
there were some additional project work related questions. However, this one had stood out as one that had kind of garnered the most engagement.
So other departments did this kind of ranking process as well?
They did
No,
not,
it was just DPW.
because they put it forward. I mean, I believe the committees all had an option to do so, but
So that's where I'm struggling a little bit, because this list on here are all capital items, and capital goes across all, well, not all departments, but a lot of different departments. So I'm trying to understand if capital was involved in this process. That I'm getting the sense that they weren't, and the departments are working really closely with the capital committee on putting projects forward. So I'm just trying to figure out where the disconnect is here.
I can address that one. Capital was not involved, and we'd be very happy to involve them in the future. This was more of a aggregation where I went to individual departments and said, what do you want? Here's a sample set of questions that other towns and municipalities have used. How would you like to see it change? And this is a case where DPW said, we like the questions, but we would also love to see some sort of prioritization, ranking of different projects. And so we said, okay, for your section of the survey, we can do that. There's no sort of across the board, across all of these different departments sort of normalization or review by capital. This is more of a copy and paste whatever DPW wanted in their particular section, and we just supported that. So, but definitely noted. Moving forward, we'll definitely make sure that capital is involved in reviewing the questions, and because it makes sense that if there's capital expenditures prioritization, it doesn't make sense to just have it on just one particular section.
Right. I mean, the capital budget gets reviewed all together, right? So we can't approve, $1 million capital item for DPW, and I'm just making these numbers up, and for fire at the same time, right? Like, we have to look at it as an overall town. So I think there's some inconsistencies here that we just need to be careful on how we use this data.
Yep.
Thank you, Ms. Malinowski. Mr. Healy.
Yeah, no, I told you I had a couple of statisticians in the house, and I emailed them, and they had, and again, and I assume you guys are statisticians, so I'm not telling you something you don't know. And following up on Ms. Malinowski's point, I mean, this is the first time this has been done. It is, even generously, it's 4 to 6% of the population. But the two questions that my kids asked me is, number one, with 4 to 6% of people responding, is there some indication, either in questions that were included in the survey or metadata or otherwise, for you to know how folks came upon the survey? In other words, so I'll start. You're nodding, so you understand my question. So number one, so that's my first question. Do you know how people became aware of this survey and ended up responding?
There's a question at the end of the survey that asked that, but we didn't put it in this presentation because there was 157 questions.
Right.
So,
no, I get it. So, but do you have, in other words, I mean, it was interesting when you put up that it seemed like a decent number of people responding had daily access to Facebook sites and to a blog, and it would just be curious to me if that was one of the main reasons that folks ended up responding to the survey, that because they became aware of it through that. So is there a sense, and I'm not holding you to it, but is there a sense from that question you just referred to as to how people ended up responding to the survey? Did they see it on the town website? Did they see it on a blog, through a Facebook site? Did they stumble upon it at the transfer station? Is there any sense along those lines?
I don't remember that off the top of my head. I would have to review it.
Okay, I'd just be curious about that. And I'm assuming you would as well, because if one thing was a very valuable resource for getting people to respond, and other things you tried to do what was not, then that's something presumably you'd want to know for the next time around. And then the second question, we did post
it on my Southborough blog, and it was posted in SOBO Community Shares and Cares Facebook group. So those were avenues that we used for marketing.
Okay. And the second question is, how much identifying, it's interesting. I saw the survey. I said, you know what, I'm not going to respond to this because it's supposed to be helping me. So I'm not going to self-select myself and talk about how, wonderful the Board of Selectmen is. But is there identifying information about not the individual identity of the respondents, but characteristics of the respondents? In other words, how long have you been in Southborough? Are you an empty nester? How many kids do you have, if any? Are you single, married, divorced, all sorts of things like that? Was there, how much identifying information was there along those lines, if any?
Yes. So there were demographic related questions, I think, and there actually were quite a few questions related to how long individuals have been in Southborough, how long they intend to stay in Southborough, how many have children, how many have, say, a single family home versus some other type of housing. That a lot of that is available in our more complete slide pack if you want to kind of focus in and take a look at some of those. In addition, there was demographic data collected, so things like age of the respondents, what the race was, gender identity, and a few other related questions like that. So you can start to get a sense of kind of what a lot of this, it was all anonymized, so we don't have to say like name of person or what part of town they live in, but there's some sense of what a typical respondent looks like from this data.
And again, this would be incredibly, I'm assuming that there's not a next layer of analysis to, were folks with children prioritizing this area, were people without children prioritize? I'm assuming there was no analysis along those lines.
I don't recall. I think this is within this like realm of like affordable and diverse housing. There were questions regarding like respondents with children. I don't have it in front of me right now, but it is part of that survey, and there is a specific section on it.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I'd like to see that actually, I'll shoot it to my kids. And as I said, to the extent I can sound at all informed about this, it's because they're chirping in my ear and sort of giving me some insight about how to think about data and look at data. So anyway, with that, appreciate this. All information is good information, and next year, building upon this will be even better information. And 5 years from now, when it's even more fine honed and there's a history of the information, will become even more valuable. So kudos to for the effort.
All right, thank you, Mr. Haley. So I will just close by saying again, thank you for all of the effort that was made here. Angela and Matt, I know putting together 157 question survey and getting down to 157 questions probably wasn't easy. And again, Mary Ann and Brian, appreciate your time and effort in compiling the data. I would just ask Matt if you could just forward over to Mr. Purple some of the comments and the data. I mean, I think at the end of the day, it helps us in a lot of ways to actually see how people responded. Sometimes it's a one-word response that you can interpret a lot of different ways, but I think at the end of the day, it kind of goes towards more what everybody's looking for, just better town government. So again, thank you for your time. Thank you for coming, and we'll certainly, I'm sure, be in touch soon. Thank you all. Good night. All right, that leads us to our next agenda item, which is fiscal year 23 operating budget. If we could bring Mr. Ballantyne over, that would be wonderful. I know Brian had sent over some updated information. Hi, Brian, how you doing?
Good, how are you?
Happy New Year.
Yeah, you too.
Even though it wasn't necessarily happy, but Happy New Year anyway. So, Brian, do you want to just touch on, I know we had talked about, at past meetings, some of the information we were looking for. I know that you sent an update around late this afternoon. Do you want to talk a little bit about the update, what you changed? I know there was some confusion on the level service. So do you want to touch on that? We'll open it up as we go through these for questions.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I know it's a lot of information, but I don't think it'll take very long because it's kind of building off what we started with last time at our last meeting. So we did update the memo, and I'll start with that. I just wanted to point out in the middle of the memo, there's a listing of amounts to, what you need to reduce to get down to a 3% or 4% or 4.5%. That's based off of the shifted rate. And if you recall, we had 3 rates that were shift rates. I'm not sure the correct terminology, but shift rates, 7, 10, and 12%. And the board, and I think prudently recommended using that 10% as the marker until we could, when and if we get more accurate information to maybe change that or not change that. But so that's what those numbers are based on. I just wanted to make sure you knew that. I didn't put it in there specifically. So I didn't want anyone getting confused. So the first document is that I'll just point out is what I'll call the updated recap. And that's basically where we stand now, updated with there was a handful of departments that recently made changes to their budget. Most significantly, DPW has been working with advisory and going through their budget a little more finely, and they ended up reducing it, it was a little bit over $100,000. So that kind of made a big difference on or somewhat of a big difference on our percentage. So right now we stand at 4.89%.
I'm sorry, Brian, do you mind sharing it on your screen? Because I don't think that, unless this was updated in the public packet, I just want to make sure anybody watching remotely can see.
Sure.
Thank you, Chelsea. I was going there myself.
Okay.
So perfect.
Yeah, let me just, there we go. I don't know if it's this one. Oh, picked the wrong one. There it is.
That
So
shows
hopefully
a
you can
Brian, sorry, that shows a 4.5% increase.
Oh, so then I have to do it through mine. Oh, just give me a second. Because I see 4.89, so of course.
And Brian, while you're looking for this, the recap the document you're about to show us, this does not include the reductions that you had in the level service exercise, right?
Correct, correct. So I think you can now see it. And this document only represents what has changed in budget since we last met. So it's only, like I said, a handful of departments. It's not taking into effect the shift or anything else like that. It's just where we are right now. So that's literally what this document is. So that's kind of where we started. And then we kind of went through and did an exercise of, culling out the new hours where we first started. And then we kind of honed it down. Well, actually, we opened it a little more wider to go through the departments and pick out any new service or item that might be new to a department. Some of them are little gray areas. A lot of them were just updating things, and we didn't really count some of that because it's not really a new item. It's just a continuation of the service or just a increased cost to a service. So we came up with a list totaling about 181,000 that potentially is items that are, under that category. And I can actually go to that screen, make it easier to see, hopefully. And then what we did is took that 181,000 and updated that recap. So that's kind of the steps we did. We kept Board of Health, just as I mentioned. That's I put that on there for illustrative purposes only. I do know there was a plan for the Board of Health, and so I didn't want to include that. I didn't think that was prudent unless the board thought it was reasonable to do that. So I'm going to bring up the list also, which is here. Yes. So here's our list. Here's the 181,000. Obviously, it spans quite a few departments, and it brings it down, about 40 basis points, 39 basis points if you took that off, all those departments. Obviously, I did the bottom part for Board of Health just to see that also. So that translated into the final recap, which equals 4.50. Without those monies in there. And just to kind of complete the loop, we did a final spreadsheet with the tax shift, which you saw last time we did this, and I can show that real quick. I don't know how to do this. So here it is. You see the 4.89 is where we're at. Obviously, this is the middle area where we're kind of targeting, and so to get down to that 4.89 from 6.71, you'd need a 1.82% change in lowering this budget. So I think that's kind of where we stood, and I was kind of hoping tonight, at least, perhaps the board could entertain whether they want to move ahead with this concept. It may not be the numbers you see in the building list that I had. We would certainly go over again and we'd probably want some feedback from the departments because they are not, aware of the numbers yet. So we'd probably do that, get some feedback, see, go over the numbers to make sure they're accurate again. And, then we could move forward if the board wants to do that. The second thing is, there's actually two more things I think, at least for tonight, and that's if the board is ready to know who they might want to see in the budget process. If there's any departments, if the large departments should be planning on coming in, or, if you want to give direction on who the board wants to see. And then the third thing is I thought maybe we could tackle the free cash issue only because that clouds we know we have $333,000 of free cash being held over, or held to the side. And as long as we hold that, if it's gonna go back into the operating budget, we should probably just do it. If this isn't the year to hold it back, we all know the risk of that, or the problem with that, but the board should decide if they would like to do that, or shift it to stabilization, or to OPEB, or you don't have to make a decision tonight on that, but it just would be good to sort of move it forward a little bit. So I think that's where we stand for now. If there's any questions, I'm happy to.
All right, Brian, thank you. Before I open it up to the board, I just want to ask, on the 4.89% increase, so that includes the $400,000 for road maintenance that
Yes.
capital has not approved yet.
That's correct.
And just for the board, for just some basis on this, when Karen initially came to capital, and she had thought there was a lot going on with a lot of different projects, and she said she was kind of at the end of her bandwidth of what we were going to be doing for projects. So that was why capital had taken that off, and I guess things have changed since then. So Karen has to come back. So when you look at the 4.89, just know that that has $400,000 in there that capital has not signed off on yet. That number may from capital go to 4. It may come down to 2. So there's a little bit of wiggle room in that number as well. So just before I open it up to the board, I just wanted to throw that caveat out there for everyone. So Mr. Dennington, we'll start with you.
Okay, well, I had some questions about the spreadsheets, if that's a good place to start. So in the shift exercise, I hope I'm phrasing the question correctly here, but you do the I had it here, the 10% shift, how that affects a 4.89% recap, and how that really brings it to a 6.7% increase in average property taxes, right?
Yes.
Okay, so, and this is just for argument's sake. In the exercise you did where you brought the 4.89 down to 4.2, and that's taking out that $181,000 of line items, and then also not including the new hours for Board of Health. So that's how you got to the 4.2. What does the 4.2% look like under a 10% shift?
The 4.2 under 10% shift, so that's down, let's see, what's that, a little more than 0.5%. So reduce what you'd need to go down by about 0.5%, which is about probably $200,000, somewhere around there. Makes sense, actually.
Okay, well, just some observations. In the up-to-date budget you're showing that total expenditures year to date are up it's 2.2%, right? So that's a pretty relatively low number, and the percentage increase in the property tax, it's still, again, a big driver of it, right? Is last year's shift of commercial versus residential.
That's correct. Most of it is that. There are some other items because sometimes you have funding items that offset, like other funds that offset the budget, and they can fluctuate year to year. So there's probably a little bit of that too, but majority of it, you're correct, is that issue.
So I think that in the exercise you did, I've just circled a couple things that, I would like to understand more, hear from the department more about what would be the impact of not including this. one is there's about $50,000 of it would be not including the 5th full-time communications officer of police. We did have a discussion about that before. And I think where we left on it was that the request to do it in this fiscal year was withdrawn. And then we just revisit this question this year. There's $10,000 removed for fire accreditation. I know that's a big priority of Chief Achilles. So I want to hear more about what would it mean to take out that number. And, the part-time inspectional hours for the building department, that's $42,000. I mean, those are some big ones where I would want to understand more information about what would be the impact of taking that. Obviously, the Board of Health is something that we would want to consider too, but just something throwing out there. I mean, is that something that it could potentially be funded through ARPA money? I don't know whether, it seemed like it would fit right within the criteria of what's eligible to be used.
You could. Again, there's the danger of that's not going to be forever, but you could. You're right.
Okay. And then on your question about what to do with the free cash, is there kind of a rule of thumb about, how much free cash you should have as a percentage of overall budget or something like that? Or do you think that taking out the 333 would have any impact on the town's bond rating?
It's a little bit of a philosophical question. I did look at the historical free cash for the past 10 years, and it's funny, it's usually about 2 to 4% of budget, of total operational budget. So that doesn't seem like a lot, but when you look year to year, there's a lot of swings between $200,000 to $400,000, which is, there's not too many swings over like 50 or 100. It's usually big swings, which I was a little surprised. I thought there'd be a few more years of just smaller swings, but there were larger swings. And I think that's what we're just trying to avoid. And it's a little bit of it is out of our hands, right? There's some we just don't know that are going to happen. And there's nothing we can do. But we always were trying to shoot for like $1.2 million. Somewhere right around that area is like our sweet spot to try to keep it at. And I guess we have a good problem. It's been typically higher than that. So I don't want to say that's a bad thing. It's just, we're just trying to cull that. When you get around 1.8 or 2 million for a town our size and everything, that's a little high. And that's where you get a little concerned, not because we have it, just because because you could have a year where we use it and then we go down to $1.2 million and, we have a close to $1 million deficit as we start the year. So we're just trying to avoid that. And it could be a multi-year thing. Again, maybe this isn't the year. Maybe the board feels that we'll address this further down the road. But we certainly at least want to have a conversation about it. And, we're always trying to think of ways to fund things like OPEB and everything. And maybe this is a good opportunity to say let's sock some money in there, or money in stabilization for future capital projects. So. That's just my thoughts on it.
Okay, that's what I've got for now.
Thank you, Andrew. Ms. Malinowski.
Thank you. Thanks, Brian. On the sheet that you're on now, on the benefits for Board of Health, is that 2 sets?
Yes. It's prorated based on what I understood Carla was offsetting this year with CARES funds. So it wasn't exactly half a year. It was some formula type thing. And I got the numbers from her and just prorated it based on that. So the full burn in is obviously in FY23, but it's the full amount, but it's not the full amount that we have this year because of the CARES offset. So that's kind of why it's different.
So because Carla allocated a percentage of hours based on what was budgeted for this year. So
Right.
she budgeted the nurse position benefits 15 over 40.
Yeah, I believe that's true, yes.
Okay, that number still seems low to me because neither position should be is even 50% funded in the budget.
Right. I think that's the issue, is that if I think that as we stand now,
Yeah, that's my vote.
you know, Carl and Brian are correct. But if,
Yep.
as you suggested, Ms. Malinowski, if the positions now go back to less than full-time or less than 19 hours a week, they're no longer benefit eligible. So any savings would probably be the full amount of benefits rather than the way it's presented. Is that right, Brian?
I think so. I'm sorry, I was looking at the note that I had in there.
So, and I don't want to go off on a tangent on this one. We can take it offline. But in my mind, this number should be 25 over 40 times benefits and 12.25 over 30 times benefits.
Yeah, I'll get together with her, Chelsea, and just
Okay,
verify if we were off somewhere.
okay. Thank you. So,
That's easy.
and just to, I'll kind of respond to some of the things that Andrew actually brought up. So on the fire lines, I spent some time going through that budget in particular after watching advisories meeting. And I was actually pretty disappointed that there weren't really any questions around, in general, one of the largest budgets that is going up over 2% before we do contract negotiations. And some of the lines in there are spelled out to be part of the accreditation process. And I think that this board needs to understand what accreditation means and the financial outlook of that. You know, I understand that, you know, Chief Achilles has done a lot of work to kind of prep the department to get ready to go for accreditation. And I think a lot of the documentation that he's pulled together is extremely relevant, very helpful for the department. I think it's proved some of the areas that he is working with the staff on in terms of improvement for residents. So I think there's a lot of value in some of the groundwork that he's done. But I think that, you know, I would like to hear more at this board's discussion on whether this is the path that we want the town to take to kind of be the trailblazer in the state of Massachusetts to become, you know, potentially the first town department to be accredited. I think it's a lot of work. I think we just need to make sure that that's the direction that the town should be going in. You know, and do we want to be the first one to take a look at that? So I think there's a lot in the fire budget. There was also something in the overtime budget that didn't line up with the base pay salary. So, you know, I really think that somebody needs to go through line by line in every single budget and make sure that we can defend that budget. And if we're going to be the ones putting the numbers in the warrant, I want to make sure that if that somebody's doing it and we trust that somebody's doing it line by line, and if nobody else will do it, then I think we need to do it. So I definitely think that fire needs to come in, and police, to talk about the 5th dispatcher discussion that Andrew mentioned. I think Chief Wallace did a nice job of explaining some of the things on the increases in the budget. And obviously the 5th dispatcher is a separate discussion, but there I didn't have a lot of questions outside of that one line item and kind of the other line items that flows into. IT, I have a lot of questions around. I want to understand kind of what Jay started with last year and kind of what he's looking to do this year. And Brian, if you can just scroll up a little bit, please.
Oh, go up, sure.
Sorry. And yeah, I think for the planning board, no, sorry, for the building department on the extra hours for an inspector, I'd like to understand from the building department, are there fees going up, and is there enough revenue to new revenue to offset the cost of those inspectional hours? Concom, again, you know, I understand the need and the ask, but I'd like to hear from Melissa on, you know, what exactly she's looking for. I'm having a hard time in this budget cycle approving new hours. Civil defense, I know that falls under Chief Achilles. I have questions about that. So I guess those are as of right now, those are probably the biggest ones that I have questions on. You know, a lot of these numbers are small. I'm sure that people really want them. I just don't know that this is the year to do it. In terms of your free cash money, I think it depends on a few things. What we're going to do with roads. So if we take road maintenance out, I think that we need to hold on to free cash because we know that roads will come back unless we're going to, I think I need to understand the plan with roads. Like, are we going to do some sort of long-term bonding project so that we're not going to have a blip in the radar of 400,000 this year and then, you know, increase more next year? You know, like, I just want to understand what the long-term plan with that is. I think the other thing to keep in mind is capital is low this year. So we have $700,000. And so I'd like to see what the next 3 to 5 years of capital looks like to understand, you know, are we going to have an increase of 1.5 million next year? So yeah, maybe it does make sense to hold on free cash, but if we're not, you know, but then we also have debt falling off. So I think there's a lot of components, Brian, that would play into whether I want to hold off on 300,000 or not.
Okay, so work to be done on that one.
Yeah. Was there something else I was supposed to answer?
No, actually, I think you hit them all. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Mr. Haley.
Yeah, just
Sorry.
a few. My questions are a little bit more overview questions. In this list, Brian, it's up on the screen now. Was that a collaborative effort to come up with those numbers, or was that simply looking at last year and if there was something additional, putting it on that list? Where did those numbers come from?
It was collaborative in the point that me, the town administrator, and the town accountant did. So that was the collaboration. But that's why I said it, if the board does want to proceed with this sort of concept, that I would absolutely be, you know, informing these departments tomorrow. So
well, they're kind of informed right now.
Yeah, or now, right? So yeah, no, they need to be a part of this too.
Okay. Because it's, you know, the question always is for us and also for down the line, what is the impact of any of these reductions? And I mean, and Lisa, I assume that what's the next thing on the agenda? Additional funding sources. I mean, as I think back to our earlier discussion about, you know, when we're going to have town meeting, one potential benefit, Mark, maybe you know, or maybe somebody else knows, has the ARPA committee met? Do you know, do they have a schedule of sitting down?
Yeah, I've not seen any postings or anything yet that they've gotten going. So no, okay. We can give them a prod.
Well, yeah, I mean, because when I was and I think others as well, when at least when I was thinking out loud, when we were talking about the ARPA money, one of the things that was talked about, and I suspect that this would fall into the category of additional funding sources, was looking at capital items for this fiscal year or looking forward that could be funded by ARPA money. In other words, stuff that's already in the pipeline, that the town already, either through its elected officials or through previous actions of town meeting, have indicated that this is money they want us, this is money that needs to be spent. And obviously that's a balance that has to be done as well, about whether or not it makes sense to use ARPA money to reduce some of the burden for next year, addressing some items that we were planning to address anyway, particularly on the capital side. And it's funny, in my view, money is money, and the idea that you use the ARPA money for capital as opposed to operational, again, money is money. If you use it to reduce the tax burden in a particular year, that's going to have implications for down the line. But it just strikes me, I mean, on the one hand, the bottom line numbers that are in there, Brian and Mark and Vanessa and others, I mean, those are less than I thought they were going to be. They're still high, but they're less than I thought they were going to be. And so we're not at a great starting place, but we're at a better starting place than I thought we might be. But I think it's important, going back to the general question, again, we're doing this in a public meeting, so the various departments are aware that there is a spreadsheet with reductions for their various departments that are listed. And presumably, if they're not watching, they're going to quickly become aware that those are at least on paper somewhere and are likely to be considered. And at the very least, they're going to have to justify why those reductions not get made. But I also think Chelsea's point is a good one. And as a practical matter, to the extent there are potential savings in the budget, unless you nickel and dime, and sometimes nickel and diming is necessary because where you find yourself from a revenue standpoint. But to the extent you're going to be able to make reductions on the spending side of the ledger, meaningful reductions are going to come from large departments. They're not going to come from an accumulation of smaller departments. So if there are, so Lisa, a question that you raised at some point, who do we want to hear from? I mean, my inclination is always to start with the big departments, and obviously that's police, fire, DPW. The schools have done a pretty good job in the past at I don't know where their heads are at for this cycle. I've heard rumblings that maybe the Algonquin numbers are going to be a slight reversal than they've been in the past in terms of the percentages that drive the numbers. But from a town standpoint, which we have the most control over, my inclination is always to start with the big guys. And I would like to have a discussion with the police chief, the fire chief, Karen, both from the long-term perspective that Chelsea talked about, but also from an annual operating basis. I mean, those are the big ones to start with, and then go from there.
Yep.
So
Great,
that's it for
thank
me.
you. Marty, did you have did I miss any thought process on the free cash? Did I miss that?
You did not. My thought process is muddled right now. I'm not sure where I am. I'm not that, I will say one thing, I'm not that worried by tapping into a large number on free cash. One of the arguments that was raised and has been raised about the stabilization fund is that Southborough has got the wherewithal, any town really, unless they're teetering on bankruptcy, has the wherewithal to deal with their financial obligations, and as a result, lowering stabilization and lowering free cash does not have tragic implications for your bond ratings and the like. And financial people tend to potentially have a different view of that. But I'm not worried about tapping free cash for a significant number if as part of an overall scheme to keep the taxes as low as possible this year.
Thank you. Mr. Stivers.
Thank you. Again, I'll echo some of Mr. Healy's comments that I'm not overly worried about free cash or stabilization money, as a matter of fact. And as I've stated previously, I'm also supportive of using some ARPA money to offset the impact on tax rates. And I think that if it would be possible to use that ARPA money in the capital area, that's by far the cleanest way to do it, I think, since it tends to be more one time. On the other hand, as I recall, we've got at least a couple of years to spend that ARPA money here. So while there are longer term implications, it's not something that's going to come back immediately. And as I look across the list of reductions here, again, I think that the real opportunity comes in some of the bigger departments, and I think there's a lot of pain that results from these kinds of things. So I'm more compelled by programmatic needs, I guess, and I philosophically would be supportive of a little higher tax rate to preserve a lot of the things that I think people care about in terms of some of the departmental functions. So again, it's obviously a real challenge here, and I agree with Chelsea that it's worth looking at each one of these lines carefully to see if there are places we can find efficiencies, savings, etc. But again, I would rather look at some of the bigger numbers to avoid the nickel and diming in some of the smaller areas that I think would have unfortunate implications. In terms of who I'd like to see, again, the big ones, I'd throw the Board of Health in there as well. They're obviously something that important to keep on the radar here as far as those functions. And as I've listened to some of the Board of Health meetings, I think we're getting a lot better support for a wider variety of things that we haven't had the support for previously out of Board of Health for a variety of reasons. Some of that's coming from state grants, some of it's coming from regionalization, but things that people don't pay a lot of attention to often, things like restaurant inspections, food inspections. I think we're really getting back in the game on that, where we had been behind on that for a while. So those are important functions that maybe not be as visible, but I think it's important to support those kind of things. So again, my bottom line is that I'm interested in finding ways for some additional funding from various places like ARPA. And if we can look at fees, for example, which I know we've done in various ways, if there are other opportunities out there. And I think we're going to see some of the impact from the meals tax coming in here, even though it's not a huge number. Every little bit helps. So again, I want to look through some of these in more detail, but philosophically, I'm less focused on squeezing on the smaller budgets than looking at the big ones. That's where I am at this point.
Go ahead, Marty.
Yeah, and it prompted a little bit by something Sam just said. It always disorients me a little bit when he agrees with me a lot. So
I do that on purpose to upset you.
But in a weird way, and maybe this is something we can communicate to the ARPA committee. I'm not gonna beat the drum too many times about the long lost stabilization fund, but in a weird way, one way to think about at least a chunk of this ARPA money is a volume of money that can be used as a short-term stabilization fund. And I think Sam is right that the easiest way to identify expenditures of ARPA money that would have a positive effect on the tax rate is to focus on capital items. But that is one thing I guess I'd like to plant that seed with the ARPA committee to think about, at least not all of that money, because I think it's important to have a balance, but think of some of that money, at least consider it as an ad hoc stabilization fund that would help ride over what we know are going to be a couple of very difficult tax years. Anyway, so sorry for not articulating that earlier, but something Sam said, I can't even remember what it was, sparked it in me. So that's it.
All right.
Lisa.
Thank you, Marty.
Wait,
Chelsea, go
Lisa.
ahead. Yep.
Sorry, Brian, keep me honest here. I don't think that's an appropriate use of ARPA. I don't think you can put it in to build up a stabilization fund, can
You
you?
can't.
Mm-mm,
No.
mm-mm.
No. That's not what I meant, Chelsea. I just meant in terms, thinking of it, I mean, the way stabilization is supposed to operate is that rather than just using your tax base to fund in a particular year, you've built up a stabilization fund and you pull from that, and it allows you to reduce the revenue that you need from the taxes.
Okay.
Because, so my point was,
Okay.
think about that as some amount of it as sitting there as an ad hoc stabilization fund.
Okay.
And how
Okay.
can we use it? Yeah, not to put it in the stabilization fund.
Got it. Okay.
Because we've got all of that ARPA money in the revenue reduction bucket, we've got the flexibility to spend it in a much broader series
Yeah.
of ways. So we've got a real benefit from the way that's been categorized now.
All right, Mr. Purple, I'm going to go to you and then I'm going to give my comments, which I haven't
Okay,
given yet.
I'll be quick because this is all like Sam is generating all of the, the feedback and everything tonight. I just want to remind, I'll start with the last one first. Just want to remind, when we talk about all this ARPA money, it's 3.1 million. Okay, we're not, it's not, tens of millions of dollars and everything in that. So I think, I agree that there are many uses to consider. Revenue replacement is one of them. But we need to be cognizant that it is, a pretty finite number. It's a nice number, but it's not entirely big. The one other comment, and maybe Mr. Stivers didn't mean it this way, but he talked about, looking at some of these lists and, maybe, with pain. I just want to point out the list that Mr. Ballantyne's got up on the screen. This is not a pain list. This is an enhancement of what's existing. I'm sure, Mr. Ballantyne, can work on putting together a pain list, that really starts to dig into existing services, existing FTE, things of that nature. So what you have in front of you is, is the enhancements, and things that people would like to do to enhance what we're doing now in a lot of respects. So I just want to keep that in mind. This is still, I don't want to say it's a pain-free level, but it is, things that people would like, but it's not cutting into the existing.
Yeah, and Mark, I should have probably said foregone opportunity list here, but I can feel pain from foregone opportunity as well as loss of existing limbs or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, look, I agree that one other thing, and then I'll stop on mute. But I think that there are things on here that do set things up moving forward. And the one example I will point to is in the IT budget, which I can't see on the screen, so I'll just go from memory, is the money that, thank you, is in the 11,400 for ISP redundancy. That's something that I know that Mr. Montijo has talked about that we need to have in place if we're going to talk about moving more items to the cloud, and to have certainty and reliability to access that data. If one of our ISPs goes out, and you've seen a lot of that lately, we have a problem. And so we need to put that redundancy. That would just set us up to be able to do other things. So again, I'm just pointing that out.
Thank you. So, Brian, from my standpoint, I think everything is on the table. I don't know that that's not helpful for you. I think the free cash is on the table. I think the ARPA is on the table. I think it behooves all of us in looking at a 10% split, no matter if it's 4.2, whatever, or 4.89, where we end up is still over 6 either way. And I think that there's a lot of work to be done. I think there's been a lot of great comments made here tonight. I agree completely with Chelsea that we really need to start going line item by line item. I know you've supplied us with those details, and I agree. We need to have the bigger departments come in, but I'm telling you, I as painful, and I hate to use that word as it is, I think every department has to have the same level of scrutiny. I mean, on a bigger budget, no matter what you take away, there's still some level of loss. And I think you're going to feel that all around. That's why I don't think some of the items on this list, whether it be $250 or $600, I think at the end of the day, They all add up, and everybody has done their fair share to try to get this budget down. So I will say that I certainly would like to have Karen come in and talk about the roads. I know we have a grant opportunity further down under consent agenda. I don't really want to touch on that, other than I would like to know from Karen, where we stand as far as the $400,000 potentially goes that's currently in the budget, as well as what impact these grants may have as she looks forward as well. I had a lot of questions of the same as everybody else. Planning board, I mean, with the policy we're going to be putting forth or discussing anyway at the end of this meeting, there's going to be monies coming back for recording secretaries that are in budgets currently for those as well. So, there's monies all around as we look through. I agree with that, having IT come in as well. But again, maybe Mark, so if we could invite Chief Achilles and Chief Paulus to the next meeting, we can go into some level of budget details. If everybody could take the time to go through the detailed budget. If you don't have those, I know Brian sent that out. I'm sure we could get Brian to resend them if you wouldn't mind, Brian, just so it's fresh for everybody. We can start getting our questions right. And Chelsea, I agree on the accreditation piece as well. I know no one in the state of Massachusetts has it. My main focus for the fire department is succession planning at this point. Looking towards the future and how do we get where we need to be. So those are just some of my final points. A lot of them were already addressed. Brian, I know that doesn't help you with free cash, other than it's still on the table. I don't know.
That's a help. So,
I mean, I think, having potentially the extra month for town meeting is going to be helpful as well. It's going to give the ARPA committee an opportunity to meet. It's going to be able to get some feedback, on that as well. And to also be able to look at as Chelsea said, the longer term capital items that are out there as well, so we can plan ahead. So that being said, Brian, what do we still owe you? Additional funding sources. We kind of touched on that with ARPA and free cash. Was that what you were thinking?
Yeah, we'll hold that out there, and I think Chelsea's comment is a good one about the roads. So maybe that will swing some people. I don't know, but we'll see.
Okay, so I think we know future departments, so we can all put together a list. I mean, it seems like we're all kind of on the same page on what was given tonight. With having questions, especially on the new additions potentially of employees. So.
Lisa,
Okay.
can I just add two final thoughts on
Sure.
this?
Yep.
So one thing that I think Mark and Carla and maybe Brian have asked Jennifer from CSS to review is Baker's ARPA bill and what opportunities exist or what opportunities could be relevant for Southborough to look into. So if we can maybe get some feedback from her sooner rather than later on any operational items or one-time items in the budget for this year, so that maybe we could pull some of that out. My other comment related to ARPA usage, the town ARPA usage, is we don't go through what already exists. We're only going through what's new, right? We historically have not gone through and said, do we really need to be doing it this way anymore? And really getting into that level of detail. So that's part of my hesitancy with using ARPA money is I think I feel more comfortable using it if I knew that we weren't just kind of smoothing everything over and saying, we don't need to go back and look to see what we've historically put budgets at. So that's really where I'm hung up. I don't want to just skirt around the budget process and not really take a hard look and say, does this dollar make sense to spend here? I really, in order to get it down to 3%, I don't want to use an arbitrary number to get to, but we're looking at cutting $1.7 million. Like that, that's a significant amount of money that's cutting into existing budgets. And I just don't think that we've, at least since I've been involved, have really got into going in and cutting things that we currently have today. So I really think we need to do that in addition to this, these new requests here. So those are just my final thoughts.
Nope. And I think, Chelsea, I think that will come out as we go through the detailed budget with the larger departments and, down the line, going line item by line, and we can ask those questions. So that's great. Anyone else? One last final thought before we move on? Okay. Brian, thank you very much. Much
Thank you very
appreciated.
much. I do appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. That takes us down to reports. I do have one, it's not listed, but I just wanted to share with the board that Caitlin Willis is leaving to pursue another opportunity from the Access Media SAM. So wonderfully enough, as sad as we are to see her go, Terry will be taking over as the, I want to make sure I don't screw this up, as the executive director. So Terry's going to be filling that role, which is great. We're all familiar with her. And she also thanked Trevor for all of the work that he does behind the scenes. So best wishes to Caitlin and Terry. We're looking forward to working with you once everything gets back up and running and hopefully life return to some semblance of normal. So that's what I had for chairman's report, members report. Nobody, anything listed? Did anything unexpected come up? Okay. Mr. Purple, did you have anything under town administrator?
No, I'm all set right now. Thank you.
Okay. Next up is going to be fun. So consent agenda. So I can tell you I'm holding, this might make it easier for everybody. I'm holding everything but F and H.
Lisa,
So-
don't you put the stuff on the consent agenda?
Well, I do, but well, not really. Mr. Purple does, but some of this stuff, most of it's just a clarification, Marty. So
Okay.
it should be easy. So does anyone want to hold F or H?
I actually do want to hold down.
Okay.
The question.
You want to hold F? Okay. So it looks like we can approve H then, if no one has any objections.
I'll
Okay.
so move.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Dennington.
About F?
No, about H, approving H.
Oh,
We had
okay.
a motion and a
No, I
second.
don't have any questions about it.
Okay,
accepting
I just need an
no
I from you then.
motions in the library, no.
Okay, do you have an I?
Aye.
Okay, great, thank you. Mr. Healy,
Aye.
Ms. Malinowski,
Aye.
Mr. Stivers,
Aye.
and Ms. Brascio. Aye, great, thank you very much. So I had an edit on December 7th. So we'll start with that, and then we'll go around if anyone else has December 7th. On line 116, I think we still spelled Lynbrook wrong. So if we could just verify, I think it's L-Y, I don't think it has an E. Mr. Purple, if we could just verify the spelling of that.
You're right. It's like the woman's name, Lynn.
Yeah. So there was that, and then on line 208, under discussion of warrant articles, I'd like to add that Chair Braccio reported Ms. Kristen Lavault had reached out to inquire. I'd like to add about the agenda item regarding the potential of moving town meeting. She didn't reach out to me to bring this forward. She reached out to inquire about it. So if we could make that change, those are the only changes I had on the 7th. So we'll go round table. Chelsea, did you have any on the 7th?
I didn't.
Okay, Mr. Healy, Mr. Stivers?
I did.
Okay, go ahead, Sam.
Line 63 and 69, John Wood without an S on the end. Line 283, MTC instead of NTC. And line 288, evaluation. Not valuation, evaluation. That's it for me.
Okay, Mr. Dennington, did you have any?
On line 312, I think Melanie's last name is spelled wrong. December 7th?
Yep, I'm just looking. Okay, we'll verify that. All right, so that being said, do we have a motion to approve December 7th, 2021 minutes as agenda? as
So
amended.
moved. So moved.
Thank you, Sam. Is there a second? Thank you. Mr. Dennington,
Aye.
Mr. Healy,
Aye.
Ms. Malinowski,
Aye.
Mr. Stivers,
Aye.
Ms. Brascio, aye. Thank you very much. We'll go around. Chelsea, did you have any edits for December 14th?
No.
Okay, Mr. Healy? Okay, Mr. Stivers,
Nope.
Mr. Dennington?
I am checking again. I don't think I did. No, I don't.
I didn't either. So do we have a motion to
Very good.
approve the December 14th, 2021 minutes as presented?
So move.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Dennington,
Aye.
Mr. Healy,
Aye.
Ms. Malinowski,
Aye.
Mr. Stivers,
Aye.
and Ms. Brascio, aye. Great, thank you. We have December 14th joint meeting with advisory. We'll start with Mr. Dennington. Do you have any?
No, I don't.
Okay, Mr. Healy?
No.
Okay, sorry. Ms. Malinowski,
No.
Mr. Stivers,
Nope.
Ms. Brascio, none. Do we have a motion to approve the December 14th, 2021 joint meeting with advisory as presented?
So move.
Is there a second?
Second.
Great. Mr. Dennington,
Aye.
Mr. Healy,
Aye.
Ms. Malinowski,
Aye.
Mr. Stivers,
Aye.
Mr. Purple, even though you're not an aye. Yes.
I'm not trying to vote. I'll let you finish the vote and then I just comment
Okay.
afterwards.
Ms. Brascio, aye. Okay, go ahead, Mark.
My only comment is, I know my name is on those minutes for December 14th joint with advisory. They're my notes, but Miss Berry made them look better than they should have. So, and she was able to read my handwriting, so she gets extra points for that. So just
All right.
wanted to give credit where credit was due.
Nope,
Okay,
that's
so-
great. I held B, approved board meeting dates from January. I held this because I wanted the board to be aware that April 19th falls during school vacation week. So that may be an issue. So if the board wants to consider a date around that after vacation week, I'm just looking real quick here. So we could actually do the 26th if the board was interested in doing that versus the 19th. I see no no's at this point.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
okay.
So the
Go
only
ahead,
thing to
Chelsea.
keep in mind though is depending on when we do town meeting,
Right, I
you
thought,
know, you think,
go ahead.
I would prefer it to not be school vacation week, so that would be better for me. I just want to keep in mind that, you know, if we do the 30th, is that maybe that's a better to have it right before? I don't know.
That's what I was thinking. Any
Okay.
last minute things that may come up, it might behoove us to
Okay.
do it that way. So if everybody's good, we'll change that, Mr. Purple, to the 26th. Okay, great. The only other thing is, and it really doesn't matter, is June 7th. I'm away. I'm at my cabin in the middle of nowhere, so I may have to dial in, but that's the only other objection I had to those dates. Does anyone else have any issues? Okay, so then do we have a motion to approve the board meeting dates from January to June of 22 with the change of April 19th to April 26th?
So move.
Is there a second? Great, thank you. Mr. Dennington,
Aye.
Mr. Healy,
Aye.
Ms. Malinowski,
Aye.
Mr. Stivers,
Aye.
and Ms. Brascio, aye. Great, thank you very much. The next item is fairly straightforward. The reason that I held it was, I think this is one of these things we've talked about in the past that it's administrative in nature. And I really think that going forward, this is something that Mr. Purple should just be able to do. These, Mark, you said this comes up. Is this the first one, the buyback you've had since you've been with the board?
It's the first one in 9+ years that I've had. So these are extremely rare.
Yeah, and how many, I mean, typically they come before the board for us to as well, you know, sign off. I know we have to sign the paperwork on them when somebody buys No?
No, you delegated that to me.
Yeah, so, okay, thank you.
This kind of fell within that same envelope, it seemed to
No.
me, but because it's a little bit different, I just wanted to give the board an opportunity, and if you all shake your heads that you're fine, and in another 9 years when this comes up, I can handle it without having, the board have to see it, then that's fine. But this is here just because it's a little bit of an anomaly, and I want to make sure that you're good with that.
No, so that was the reason for the hold. If the board is fine going forward, that, Mr. Purple can approve a buyback of a plot, then, okay, I see no objection. So that being said, then, do we have a motion to approve the request to buy back the cemetery plot as in the packet?
So move.
Is there a second?
Second.
Great. Mr. Dennington,
Aye.
Mr. Healy,
Aye.
Ms. Malinowski,
Aye.
Mr. Stivers,
Aye.
and Ms. Braccio. Great. Thank you very much. I act.
Do we need
Sorry,
to
Sam.
delegate somebody to test the plots?
No, I think we're good, Sam. Thank you. The next one I held because I had put this in here. So we had prior approved these minutes on November 3rd. If you go to line 200, we just added the words in signed off on by town council. The prior minutes said signed by council and St. Mark's Council. I went back and watched the minutes. I didn't think I said that. I said signed off. So I just wanted to make that clarification. It has been misquoted, so I just wanted to make sure. So that is the only change, is adding signed off on. So that being said, if there's no discussion, do we have a motion to reconsider approval of November 3rd, 2021 open session meeting minutes?
So move.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Mr. Dennington,
Aye.
Mr. Healy,
Aye.
Ms. Malinowski.
Aye.
Mr. Stivers,
Aye.
and Ms. Braccio, aye. And E is being tabled at this point, so there's no approval of that required. And that brings us to F. Andrew, that was your hold.
Sure, I just had a question because in the budget, there's a line item for special counsel, and I'd always thought of it as that's for labor counsel. So again, I have no objection at all to the appointment of Mr. Tremblay to be special counsel for bankruptcy services. Just wondering whether any fees we pay him are already budgeted for.
So special counsel usually covers labor and anything else that isn't town council. But this happens fairly infrequently. I could bring, the board could bring Mr. Valentine back over just to speak to it briefly. I'm not sure if these fees are recoverable in the bankruptcy process. So it might be good just to, put a stake in this if you bring Mr. Valentine back over just real quickly to speak to this.
And thank you to Brian for hanging around.
He was politely asked after the item was held.
Okay.
Just hang around.
Hi, Brian. Welcome back again.
I'm not in my PJs yet. Yeah, so this does happen very infrequently. Just to give you a very quick background, we probably have 2 cases that are still under agreement now that were a result of a couple years ago, a couple bankruptcies then. Any bankruptcies that have happened since then have been simple enough or not relevant enough to the town that I haven't needed it. So it's sort of like we can go a year or 2 without anything, and then all of a sudden we'll get like maybe 2, maybe 3. It's very light. As far as the fees, so yes, we were successful in putting the town council fees within the accounts and eventually getting reimbursed. The problem is, like any other fee, it goes right to the general fund. It's not back to the budget. But yes, eventually we were successful in our previous settlements with getting those back.
Okay.
All right, Andrew, does that answer your question?
Yes.
Any other questions for Brian? Okay, Do we have a motion for the appointment of special counsel for bankruptcy services?
So move.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Mr. Dennington,
Aye.
Mr. Healy,
Aye.
Ms. Malinowski,
Aye.
Mr. Stivers,
Aye.
and Ms. Brascio. Aye. Thank you, Brian. Much
Take
appreciated.
care.
Okay, next up, discussion of assignment of surplus tax title parcels. So the board had prior seen the,
Hold on, Lisa. We didn't do G.
I got G, yeah.
oh,
Grant.
I had it crossed off with wishful thinking on my part. Okay. I held this one because, Mark, I wanted you to just share some information on this with the board. I know this just came in, so.
Sure, I thought you wanted to return the $379,000 because you had it crossed off. Okay.
No.
So we got some good news from Senator Eldridge's office when it came to the $70,000 for the Northborough Road Culvert project. We struck out on the ADA grant. We struck out on the swinging, by the way, on the community compact for IT. And then, we were awarded this $379,316 for the Complete Streets grant. This covered two projects that Karen had applied for. One was the part of the Main Street project, the rail crossing, the CSX crossing, which is going to be, quite expensive. This will help to offset some of that. And also to do some sidewalks as part of the Newton Street water main replacement project. I think Karen did a nice job trying to explain in the memo how this funding shakes out, because by putting this funding into those projects may free up other funding. But I think in some of the previous discussions that we've had earlier this evening, I really think it takes a little bit of an in-person discussion. I'm not going to do it justice this evening to be able to tell you how the funding is going to shake out and what it will mean at the end of the day, after you run all the money through all the projects, what we're going to have left that is unallocated for overages, for other things that may come up, things of that nature. And again, I believe Ms. Malinowski and others had indicated tonight, need to understand this $400,000, Ms. Braccio, what happens with the 400, which then, and how does that play into this calculations? And, again, what does this 379 impact it? So the important thing this evening, I think, is basically formally accepting the grant. And then, the follow-up is obviously having a better understanding of how this grant award impacts all of our road projects and our funding and any additional road money that we'd be considering for FY23.
Great. Thank you, Mark. So I certainly was not holding this to not accept the monies. I don't think any of us would want to do that, but I thought it would be great just to share again, that we were awarded this money. It's a good thing, but there's certainly questions about going forward. So does anyone have any questions for Mark on accepting the grant?
No, I don't have a question. I just think that, it's a big deal. We wrestled with the idea of what to do with the crossing. And I think everybody wanted to make it ADA compliant for all the right reasons. And, Karen did, I maybe in the back of my mind, I was aware that Karen was beating what I thought was probably a dead horse, but man, oh man, credit to her for, that railroad crossing is going to be ADA compliant now. And for sure. And that is just terrific news.
I agree, Marty. Thank you. Okay. No other questions. Then do we have a motion for the acceptance of the Complete Streets Grant Award?
So move.
Is there a second? Thank you. Mr. Dennington.
Aye.
Mr. Healy.
Aye.
Ms. Malinowski.
Aye.
Mr. Stivers.
Aye.
And Ms. Brascio. Aye. Thank you, Chelsea, for catching that. Next up is the discussion of assignment of surplus tax title parcels. I had done this presentation. I'm not going to go through the whole thing. I'll go through quickly on a couple specific parcels. Vanessa, can I share screen, please? I'll just pull it up. The reason for bringing this on here is I had a conversation with Melissa in conservation, and I think some of these parcels would be well served by putting them under the care and control of conservation. Okay, here we go. So again, I just touch on some of this. I had let me move this over. Sorry. Okay. So when I initially did this for capital, you know, I looked at every parcel that was owned by the town, whether it be through, these are just a listing of what I had looked at, of what was owned by the town, so we could know where we're at. So what I did is I did an analysis based on the assessors for land, property, and recreation. Obviously, my focus was on land. I disqualified any parcel that was deed restricted from either a conservation restriction or via a subdivision approval. I analyzed all the deeds or anything that was currently under the care and control of conservation. And where I ended up was, oops, I went backwards. Sorry about that. This was the remaining list after the disqualifiers. As you can see, I think it was 11, roughly 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11 parcels. So what I'm asking the board to consider tonight is, and I'm going to go through and I'm going to show you some of these parcels. I think some of them would be, just make sense. We don't have to go to town meeting. It's just transferring control of them over to the care and control of conservation. The first one is this 0.78 acres on Wood Street. You can see it's mainly made up of wetlands. Most of these parcels are actually leftover pieces of subdivisions that were unbuildable for whatever reasons, and they're sitting out there and they were taken for taxes. Specifically, this was a tax taking. So I would ask the board to consider this particular parcel. I don't know if anybody has any questions on it. But again, as you can see, it's wet. There's no buildable value or recreational value based on anything around it. It's just an addition to the resource area. I can answer questions on each, or I can go through them. Up to the board. Okay, I'll just keep going forward then. So the next is a Southville parcel. And as you can see, it abuts the railroad tracks and the Sudbury River, and it is completely wet, completely wet. So this is just another one to consider. Again, there's not a whole lot of value to the parcel. If you drive by there, you'll see how wet that it is. So I would ask the board to consider that. The next two parcels, I'm going to leave it up to the board. These are off of Liberty and Vale. And there is actually off Liberty Estates is where the ball field is currently, you can see right here. So at some point, the board may find some level of value between this parcel and this parcel, which again, this is the parcel that you just looked at, and this parcel, it connects through Vale. There's a lot of wetlands, there's open space, so access to this piece off of Vale would be tough. Here's the open space collar that's deeded as open space, so access would be a little hard. But I'm not necessarily asking for the board for this. I think at some future point, you know, it might be a nice trail or something. So granted, there's wetlands on either side of it, but it's just there because it, go ahead, Sam.
I agree. I think, and that one is interesting to me because that was where you may recall there was conversation around a little park
Yep.
of a Liberty there at the southern end of the field. And I think that there is Solf territory in there as well somewhere that I think can be interesting to consider as a complete package for some sort of a more sizable project somehow. So I think that's a good one to hang on to for the time being at least and see what we can make out of it, those two parcels.
Yep, and the only reason I'm showing it is because it currently, the town owns it under the control of the Board of Selectmen. The next ones, you guys, most of you will probably remember, this is off of Woodbury Road. We took these from, it was left over from a subdivision with the Petries. This is actually a paper road. There is no road there. The only access going into these parcels, and let's see if I can get to it from here, is literally through here, which is a protected stream that's a tributary to the Sudbury River, and it goes underneath Woodbury Road. I did walk these parcels. I believe Brian Ballantyne was there. There was a group of us that went conservation open space. Up when you get up in here, it's a little bit of upland, but the nice thing is, I think it's what the value of what we want our open space to some level to be. There were swings put into trees, kids are playing out there. You can clearly see they built little things by the trees. So I think there's where this is almost landlocked. It has tremendous value. It abuts Woodland Road here, Woodbury Road here, and the extension off of Ted Road here. So where there's really no access at this point, I would like the board to consider putting these as well. The only way to get in here and to be able to potentially do something at some point is if one of these houses sold, you know, and somebody wanted to tear it down and put something in here, but it's literally sandwiched in between 3 neighborhoods. And I think that the value, and most of it's up a steep hill. So when you get to about here, this is all walking uphill. It's just this little area here that's actually flat, and that's where kids from the neighborhood are playing. So I would ask the board to consider these as well. These were accepted at town meeting, I think 3 years ago, for tax taking as well. So it's that parcel, and then there's your paper road. It's this parcel, and again, you can see there's really no access because of the open space. This is behind the transfer station. Again, it came up because it's still out town owned. I wouldn't ask us to do anything on this parcel either. Next up, this is off of Main Street. This is the aqueduct. So there is some serious riverfront protections afforded to this. So I think this was just left over that it'd be really tough to build with a 100-foot riverfront area. So the town could certainly hold on to this to see if maybe someday something. That obviously that's up, but it's into a resource area. Chestnut Hill Farm is over here. So, and lastly is the stump dump, which I'm not asking the town to put under the care and control of Concom either. Pinecone Lane, we've talked about this one before. The neighbors at one point had maintained this. It was a lot that didn't perk in the subdivision. I'm not asking the board to do this at this point. I know there's been interest. The neighbors maintained it at one point and made it like a little pocket park. So I think there's more discussion potentially on this parcel for the board. It's not environmentally sensitive like some of the others I'm asking you to put under the care and control of conservation.
That was my pocket park list too, as a matter of fact. I think that could be very interesting.
Yeah, so I think that one has opportunities there. So, and then that just takes me to review of kind of what the options are. You can put them under the control of conservation, any best suited for open space or recreation, further analyze for value for future needs as the town retains ownership, and auction. So basically the parcels that I'm asking the town to consider tonight would be the Wood Street parcel, again, mostly wet in the wetlands, not buildable. The Southville parcel, this is extremely wet. And again, it abuts the Sudbury River. The 3 Kimberly Lane parcels, which is the paper road, and then the 2 upland parcels we just talked about. And then the potentially the Main Street parcel. Those were the only 3, because again, this is a sensitive resource area as well. It'd be tough to build anything there anyway, but the board may deem that there may be future value. So those are the 2, 5, 6 out of the 11 that I would ask the board to consider putting under the care and control of conservation. So I will open it up for questions, comments. Where do we leave off? Ms. Malinowski.
I'm fine with all those except for maybe Main Street.
Okay, perfect. Okay. Mr. Healy.
I'm fine with all of them with one, I don't know if it's a caveat or suggestion or a combination of the two. Just for a comfort level to make sure we haven't missed something, to shoot an email to the open space, to trails, to rec, to see if we've missed something in the way we're thinking about the parcels.
Okay, just the well, it
Maybe
would
it's
have
already
been
been done.
6. Yeah, maybe. So I have open space is aware of these parcels because they were left over from subdivisions. So we can certainly reach out. I don't know that trails on any of these. There's really no way to put a trail through the wetland, and there's no attaching trails. The only one, Marty, that we left off because there might be potential was when we talked about the parcels over by Liberty Estates where the ball field is here. And we have this parcel and this parcel that at some point there may be some way to connect or do something. So that's why I left them out of the ask. But we certainly can reach out. There are no other trails. There is other protected land over there. There's soft land. There's some land off of Nathan Stone, which isn't too far back either. So
Yeah,
but
again,
we can
Lisa,
certainly ask.
I don't have any problem with all these. I mean, your description of where they find themselves, I think is completely accurate. I'm just thinking belt and suspenders. Is there,
Sure.
you know, anyway, that's just my one thought. But by the same token, if other folks don't have the, I don't even want to say it's a concern, because it's not a concern. I'm fine dealing with them tonight.
Okay. Sam?
I agree with Chelsea, all of the ones you propose except for Main Street.
Main
I'd like
Street.
to hang on to that one for a while.
Sure. And Andrew?
I was trying to take down what you were saying really quickly, and I
Sure.
didn't know.
I can tell you. So Wood
Okay.
Street,
Yeah.
Wood Street, Southville Road,
To-
182 Southville.
And here you're proposing to put it under the care of the Conservation Commission.
Yeah, basically it's protected. That's all
Okay.
that we're asking to do, Andrew. And
Wood
it's only
Street?
because, yes, Wood Street. I can go back to them real quick, Andrew, if you want.
Yeah, okay.
This is
thank
Wood Street.
you.
This is Southville, the
This one,
acreage-
yeah.
Yep. Going down to the 3-4, Kimberly Terrace. Let me go to the paper road right here. There's the paper road.
Okay, so not Southville with the Vale parcel.
No, not say it, Southfield or Vale. We're going to hold on to those because again, there may be some recreational value at some point. So, yeah, so it's the 3 off of Vale, which are Kimberly Lane, I guess I should say. The 3 Kimberly Lane properties and Main Street, Sam and Chelsea prefer to hold, which is fine. So it's basically the 5 parcels. It's Wood Street, Southville, and the 3 Kimberly Lane parcels at this point.
I am fine with that.
Okay, Marty, do you still want us to reach out? I'm happy to do it.
No, I'm fine.
Okay, so what we'll do is we'll reach out to conservation. Obviously they have to accept them. They have to, agree to this. Melissa and I have talked generally about it. And then, that's great. Then the other parcels will just, continue. So I guess we need to take a vote to, with approval of conservation, to put parcels 21 Wood Street, 182 Southville Road, 609 Kimberly Lane, 635 Kimberly Lane, and 4031 Kimberly Lane under the care and control of the Conservation Commission, if they accept.
So move.
Is there a second? Thank you. Roll call. Mr. Dennington.
Aye.
Boy, everybody's screwed up on my screen now. Sorry. Mr. Healy,
Aye.
Ms. Malinowski,
Aye.
Mr. Stivers,
Aye.
and Ms. Braccio. Aye. Great. So we'll take care of that. Much appreciated. Just kind of housekeeping. It's been hanging out there since I got on the board. So yes, Andrew.
Just as a historical question.
Sure.
We didn't talk much about the third option of auctioning the parcels.
Yeah.
Has the town done that? Have there been examples where successfully parcels taken for tax title and then auctioned, and or everything really has just been either held up by the Board of Selectmen or given to conservation?
So I will throw this to Mr. Purple because he's actually answered this question. We've had this discussion before. So Mark?
Yeah, and my historical knowledge base, Mr. Valentine's left. I've not done a tax title auction here. And I don't believe in conversation with Mr. Valentine that we've done a tax title auction. I've done one in my career. And the one thing that I did learn from watching a lot of auctions and then dealing with the auctioneer as because the board had assigned me as the tax title custodian, is that you need a signature parcel. You need a centerpiece, something to draw people in. And obviously I think in the parcels that were identified tonight, I think the only potential signature parcel would be Pinecone. And the board is talking about keeping that. So it may be doing something with it. So I'm not sure that a tax title auction would make sense for essentially the pieces that got left over when the developments were built, because they were unbuildable. If they were usable and they were good, they would have been used. So yeah, that's my sense, but I'm not aware that we've done a tax title auction in Southborough in the memory of people that are here.
Okay, thanks.
All right, thank you, Andrew. All right, next up is consideration of draft policy for recording clerks. So Vanessa had updated this based on our feedback from our last meeting. I did have a conversation with Karina from planning. Planning would like to take a look at this before we approve it and potentially just give any feedback they may have. They are one of the boards listed on here. Obviously, they're an elected board. And how they choose to follow the policy is kind of up to them, but they would like the opportunity. So, I mean, we had agreed in principle to what's on here. So I would just ask the board to actually table this till our next meeting. So I plan on attending planning board and answering any questions that they may have. But yeah, so I mean, go ahead, Sam.
This actually isn't quite what I thought I was supporting, as a matter of fact. I think this is far more restrictive than I had in mind, in the sense that it sounds here like nobody is authorized to hire minute takers except for these. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's what we talked about, because it was a all or nothing. I know at our last meeting, we had talked about that it would affect basically their ShopC, EDC, and historical, that this would affect, that currently have minute takers. This was the group that we had talked about.
Yeah, I remember the conversation, but I guess I thought my point had been that I think having paid minute takers for these groups is useful and important, and it helps get volunteers to serve on these committees. If people don't think they're going to wind up having to take minutes, and you probably get better minutes too. So again, sounds like I'm in the minority, but I would certainly be in favor of having some budget to get minutes prepared for a fee by a larger group of committees than the list here. Yeah.
So when we looked at it, Sam, and the number of meetings, I talked about it at the last meeting, I based it on 8. I think the number was like $40,000 to have it for everybody. And that's why we moved away from doing it for everybody.
Too big, yeah, and I agree that's too big, but I guess I'm interested in the middle ground. But anyway, it sounds like I'm outvoted here, but that's the way I feel.
But Sam, I'm asking that we can certainly discuss this again after planning board, you know, before we approve it. I'm not asking to approve it tonight, only because I think it's imperative to allow them the opportunity. I had a long discussion with Karina about it already. So, you know, we can certainly bring it up and discuss it again. I can get more concrete numbers again. I'll pull up my notes from the last meeting.
I'll get some numbers too. You don't have to do a lot of work on them. I think 40 grand is too much, certainly, but I think there ought to be a middle ground.
Okay, fair enough. All right, so that's done. Mr. Purple, closing of the warrant. I know you made some additional updates today. Do you want to touch on those quick?
I'll be brief about this. There was only a couple of things that were added to this. And I again sent out a copy to the board late, because again, these things tend to be very fluid right up until the last minute. There were 2 other things that were added from the perspective of the financial departments. One was the turn back of bond proceeds. I know that Mr. Ballantyne is working with some of the other departments and everything to take a look at any bond proceeds that can be turned back to the town. So we wanted to have an article available to us if we did find that there were things that we could be turning back. The second one was transferring some of free cash to stabilization fund. I know we talked about that tonight, potentially being an avenue. I think that OPEB can obviously, would be another opportunity, but there already is an OPEB funding article that you could address that inside of. And then the other article came in just this afternoon, late this afternoon, a citizen petition from Michael Weishen regarding preventing the use of public funds and easements to improve private property without town meeting approval, of which I had forwarded the board a copy. It was, I believe, I heard just before the meeting, the clerk's office had certified the signatures. It did have the required 10. So it is something that would be included on the warrant. So this is, as I say, this is the universe of items that could become warrant articles. And obviously people will work to develop those, will work to put these together, and then we can determine whether they become articles or whether they just, they disappear from the warrant as we move forward with them.
Okay, my process question. So kind of based on our discussions earlier. So we can close the warrant tonight. It doesn't matter that it says March 26th and we don't have a date yet for when we are going to do annual town meeting. Just to clarify, that is correct. Yes.
Yes, because right now you have March 26th, but you can change that. Your warrant
Okay.
for March 26th is going to be your warrant for April 30th or May 22nd or whatever date it is that we end up picking.
We'll go around quick. Marty, do you have any questions or comments regarding? Okay. Sam,
Nope.
Chelsea.
No.
Sorry, Andrew, I went out of order that time. Andrew.
No questions.
Okay, I don't either. So that being said, then, do we have a motion to close the warrant for Mark, do you use the March 26th date or just say annual town meeting?
You can use annual town meeting if that makes you more comfortable. we
Well,
can
I
use that.
just feel bizarre. So, okay, do we have a motion to closing of the warrant for annual town meeting? Date to be determined.
So
Great,
moved.
thank you, Sam. Is there a second? Thank you. Mr. Dennington,
Aye.
Mr. Healy,
Aye.
Ms. Malinowski,
Aye.
Mr. Stivers,
Aye.
and Ms. Braccio, aye. Thank you. The next item, it will only take me 2 minutes to go through this. It is outreach to businesses by EDC and BOS. When I first got on the board, Brian Schifrin and I had worked with Chris Robbins, and we had gone out as a selectman and an EDC member, and we met with some of the businesses in town. We showed up, we answered some questions. It actually was a very fruitful exercise. Thank businesses for being in town. They appreciated having a selectman involved as well. I had a brief conversation with Rob Anderson about this yesterday. He's very open to the idea. He thinks it would be great to be able to do this again. Our goal is to retain businesses and bring businesses to town. There's a couple new businesses that just came on Route 9 as well. So this presents a great opportunity. What I'd like to do is, if the board is receptive to opening the discussion with the EDC as far as kind of setting the process and some of the parameters, I wanted to know if board members were interested in doing this. I mean, I will tell you, I found it extremely valuable and the companies really appreciated it. We actually found questions and we're able to come back to the townhouse and get them an answer the same day. So it's a win. So we'll just kind of go around and see if there's an interest in bringing EDC in and starting a discussion and redoing this program. It was great. So Sam, we'll start with you.
Yep, I think it's a great idea. I've actually followed this in a prior life when the EDC was doing that and listened to some of the reports of those conversations. And I think that's very productive, very helpful. And, maybe it's not going to generate a lot of tax revenue near term, but I think it's an important signal to send to the business community. And I would be delighted to participate in that. So let's do it.
Awesome. Great. Thank you, Andrew.
I agree.
Okay, Marty. Okay, Chelsea.
Yes.
Okay, great. So we'll have EDC come in. I told him either, depending on how the schedule goes, either the next meeting or even the first meeting in February. He's going to mention it to the EDC at their meeting on Thursday as well. So I think it's a great opportunity. Last up for me, before we go to executive session, is discussion of proposed new Amazon facility. So we had included in the packet a couple of articles. So Amazon bought a 93-acre parcel just over the Southborough Westborough line behind the DoubleTree. They're putting in a last mile facility is what they call it. And obviously there's easy access to Route 9, 495 and the Pike. So my question for putting this on here was, I don't know if we're too late to the game to be able to have conversations maybe with Westborough or even Amazon itself. I mean, we know a lot of this traffic is going to end up, if Route 9 backs up, depending on where they're going, we're going to have a lot of trucks, more trucks and traffic coming through Southborough. I think it certainly doesn't hurt to ask the question if there's any mitigation money out there potentially available for Southborough. So that's kind of why it's on here. I mean, when Legacy Farms went in Hopkinton, we didn't get a lot, but $30,000 is going towards sidewalks. So I think there's an opportunity here. I just didn't know if kind of getting the board's thoughts on it as we consider this. So Andrew, I'll start with you on this one.
Sure. So how would you envision that? I read the article. Looks like the planning board, the Westborough Planning Board, already approved it. Where
So
would be the hook to ask for the money?
So I think we start with the boards in Westborough. I don't, they haven't built out the entire site. Again, I am certainly not an expert. Mark and I talked briefly on this. Again, you never get anything if you don't ask the question. They may tell us it's too late, but there may still be an opportunity. Marty?
Hey, since we're going to be talking to the EDC anyway, they just had the gentleman,
Holmes, Gary Holmes, yeah.
Yeah, and it might be worth having a conversation with EDC and Mr. Holmes. Maybe he's been through this before, and maybe going through the boards in Westboro is the right way. Maybe going directly to Amazon is. I just don't know. But maybe there's been some folks who have been through this ringer before and might be able to give us some guidance.
No, that's a great idea. Again, I have no idea where to go or how to do this, but I just think if we don't make an attempt, then we may have left money sitting on the table, or it may be too late. So, all right. Marty, was that kind of your thoughts on that?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's it.
Great. Chelsea?
Yeah, I'm open to exploring the option. Seeing,
Okay. Sam?
Yeah, Lisa, I think that mitigation is an interesting possibility, but there may be another way to flip it around a little bit. If we could get a conversation, maybe through Gary or otherwise, with Amazon property people or business people, it might be useful to ask the question, is there anything we can do for Amazon as part of this process? To say, do we have assets, resources, capabilities that they might be interested in? For example, I know there are buildings in Southborough that they could use to for auxiliary purposes of one kind or another, et cetera. And I don't know what else, might be on the table for that, but at least asking the question. They've done this before in other settings. What have they found that's useful to their business operations, to their staff, et cetera, and maybe housing support for people, et cetera. Again, not go with our hat in hand or hammer to say, we want money from you, but how can we work together for both our benefits here somehow? And maybe even just things like talking about, we got a wonderful trail network in town for people who are looking for places to walk or run or bike or whatever, break times, et cetera, just to sort of, here we are and we're interested in working with you kind of conversation, and uncover things that we haven't thought of that would be helpful to them and might unlock the wallet a little bit versus a straight, what are you going to do for me kind of conversation.
Yeah, no, you know what? That's why I brought it up, Sam. I mean, there's 5 of us here and 5 great ideas, but I agree, a conversation. Go ahead, Andrew.
Sam, I think that's a really good point, because, reading the article, it wasn't just about the computer drive property, it looks like it's going to be a warehouse, but also the robotics center that Amazon now has on Otis Street in Westboro.
Yeah.
And that doesn't have the same type of negative traffic that a warehouse would be. And that's something that could be very attractive to Southborough.
Yeah. And again, working with EDC and Gary, for example, might generate some good ideas with what other people have done to, quote, be supportive of Amazon operations in neighboring towns. There got to be some people who've done this before, certainly.
Okay, so you know what? Maybe this plays into our next meeting. Instead of waiting till February, we have, EDC come to the next meeting and we have the great business conversation. And, we can expand into this, and, maybe I'll speak to Rob. We'll see if maybe they can entice Mr. Holmes to be able to come as well and give us maybe some guidance.
Go knock on Amazon's door.
Hey, I'm not against doing that, Sam. I have no problem doing that. So, okay, great. So we'll put that on to the next agenda. We'll tie back to that. So great. Thank you very much, everybody. So let's go to the next public comment. Thank you for everybody that hung around. If there is anyone that would like to comment, please raise your hand. All right. Once again, anyone like to comment, just please raise your hand. Thank you for hanging around. At the very least, I see no hands. All right. Thank you. At this time, the board will be entering into executive session for MGL Chapter 38, Section 21, and not returning to open session to comply with or act under the authority of any general or special law exemption 3 to discuss a police grievance, and to discuss contract negotiations with the fire chief exemption 2, as the chair has determined that an open meeting may be detrimental effect on the town's position. Do we have a motion to enter into executive session?
So move.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All right, Mr. Healy, everybody moved around again.
Aye.
Ms. Malinowski,
Aye.
Mr. Stivers,
Aye.